Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's so good to be here. It's so good to have you all here. I can't tell you how excited we've been in the run up to today. So I just wanted to let you know that we all understand what it's like to be dealing with cancer and mental health, a whole pandemic. So we've made sure that we've set aside some quiet time for you throughout the day. So let's get this show on the road. Lindsay, are you ready?
I am ready.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. So, our first person that we're going to have speaking today is Nick Hume.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to open up this really important day today. Cancer is all pervasive in so many lives, and it's very easy to ignore the fact that cancer touches 1 in 3 lives in this country and has changed so much about the NHS, about the country, and about individual lives. I've been a chief executive for 10 years in various organisations, and I've worked in the health service for 41 years. And I have looked at cancer services, I've worked in cancer services, I have developed cancer services, and have been obsessed for many years around cancer targets at 14 days, 31 days, 62 days. And as a chief executive, it was really important to me that we delivered on those targets. It was important to me because it was my job. It was what patients needed from me. But what struck me and what's changed my view of my job, my life, and many, many of those around me is actually now the motto or the mission for the organisation that I have the privilege of leading, East Suffolk and North Essex Foundation Trust. When we merged, I was thinking about what is it that we want to be known for? What is it that we want to be, that when people say ESNEF, what do they then think? What's our mission? What's our drive? What's our ambition? And it suddenly struck me that the most important thing was time. So if you see anything about ESNEF now, and if you hear me speak, and if you hear our staff speak, we talk about time matters. And it's not just for those people who sadly lose their lives to cancer, and those of us that lose loved ones to cancer. Because yes, that time does matter. Every minute, every day that you spend waiting for an appointment, or the system working to the system's benefit and not the patient's benefit, those minutes, those hours, those days matter. But equally, those minutes and those days and those hours matter from the moment you find a lump where you shouldn't have a lump, or you have blood appearing where it shouldn't appear, or any other worrying or concerning symptom. And so for me, what is most important that we hold today at the heart of everything we discuss, time. It is really important for me. I could make a real error and think that I know everything about cancer because of my personal experience. I don't. And each and every one of you will have a unique and special set of circumstances that will affect only you and your family and the people you care about and the people that you love. And I'm not naive nor indeed arrogant enough to think that I can transpose my feelings, my emotions, my experience into that of yours and your families. But I have an insight, and every single patient that I've spoken to, not just around cancer, but around any other condition, of the 6,000 people that we see every day in our organisation, when we talk to them about time, yes, that is what matters. Because it is the only thing that we can't give back. It is the only thing that we can't reclaim. And that's why today it's really important, I think, for all of us to have that at the heart of what we have. COVID has thrown a spanner into our lives. Well, thrown a spanner, that's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? I think it's thrown a whole bag of tools into our lives, hasn't it? And There will be an impact, sadly, from COVID. We are already seeing a significant increase in stage 3 and stage 4 cancers being presented through our ED department. There will be some good, because I think that the way that we've reorganised services and the incredible work done by both alliances in the East of England, and indeed a lot of the national work to keep things going, particularly in the second and third phase, has been extraordinary. And I take my hat off and feel humble when I see the work of our clinicians in terms of keeping those services going. But we mustn't lose the opportunity that we have in terms of COVID, also about thinking about ways that we can work differently. The creativity, the innovation, the thoughtfulness of so many of our colleagues and our patients in terms of working differently as a result of COVID, we must not lose that. But we also need to recognise that there will be some incredible challenges as we go forward. Each and every one of you are an expert in your own journey. We're not the experts. Don't believe those professors with several letters after their name that claim to be the experts, because they're not. They're incredibly bright, they're incredibly kind, and they're incredibly compassionate. But you're the experts in your experience. You're the experts in your lives and your cancer, and your families are the experts in the carers, the family, and the compassion. My heart goes out to each and every one of you on this journey, wherever you are, because I have some feeling, some idea about how that is. And so before I hand over to the next speaker, I just want to say a huge thank you. Thank you for your time today, because time matters, and your giving of yourselves today. Yes, you'll learn, but the most important thing is that we listen. We listen to you. We listen to you as the experts in your care, in your lives, that we listen to your loved ones and the people who you love and who love you, that we hear from them in terms of their expertise. So thank you for your time today. I'm hoping to spend as much time on the meeting as I possibly can today. I may have to dip in and out a bit, I'm afraid. And I'll now hand over back to I don't know, because I haven't got my notes with me, because I'm handing back to Lindsay. She's waving at me furiously.
You're handing back to Lindsay. I just want to show my appreciation. If you want to turn your mics on, please. Nick, I just want to thank you for being really open and realistic with us, with our audience. And I appreciate you dipping in and out, but we do have you later on for a Q&A session. So please make sure, again, you put any questions you want into the admin side of the chat, and we'll collate them and maybe obviously come back to you later. So thank you, Nick.
Very happy to do that. Thank you.
So now I have the pleasure of introducing, see how I do, the internationally renowned cancer expert and author, Professor Robert Thomas, who is best known as a consultant oncologist at Bedford and Addenbrooke's hospitals. Professor Thomas lectures at the University of Cambridge University and is a visiting professor of sports nutritional science at the University of Bedfordshire. He also chairs the Macmillan Exercise Expert Advisory Committee, and also he designed the UK's first government-approved qualification in exercise rehabilitation for cancer patients, and also published, I don't know how he finds the time, but also published Lifestyles After Cancer, the Facts publication. So I'm aware that I probably haven't done him justice, so I'm going to play a short video which will probably introduce him a lot better than I can.
thank you for that, showing that film. It could be argued it's a little bit cheesy, but I enjoyed making it. So it hopefully conveys the messages. So hello, good morning, everyone. My name's Rob Thomas. As you just heard, I'm a consultant oncologist, and I have an interest in sort of self-help strategies. Now, that was a very motivational talk by Nick, who's obviously an excellent speaker, so it's going to be a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. And first of all, I probably need to declare, as this was an NHS conference, I do have a conflict of interest, because obviously I'd love people, sort of technically promoting the book I wrote in September. But in terms of financial interest, I wouldn't recommend it as a venture for anyone, even if it got to #1 on Amazon. The financial benefit is very small, but the benefit in writing it for me, and hopefully people who read it, I think is enormous. When you write a book, it really focuses your mind on what is relevant around you and relevant to the readers, and hopefully relevant to the patients I serve. So that was the motivation behind it, not financial, I can assure you. But anyway, and first of all, what we need to do is not blame anyone at all for getting ill. You know, in the vast majority of cases, it's no fault of their own. It could be genetic problems. It could be a lifestyle or social situation which allows people to eat and be educated. So the aim of what I'm going to talk about today is nothing to do with blaming people for illnesses. It's quite the opposite, in fact. I want to learn from people I see and we see as a unit, and hopefully share that knowledge to other people, so we can all think, you know, is there something we can do after cancer? Is there something we can do to help our well-being? So that's the motive here, not to blame. But, you know, that said, lifestyle and the choices we make over many years of our lives does have an influence on illness. So, you know, if you choose to eat lots of burnt meat, don't have many vegetables, don't exercise very well, you do have an increased risk of various diseases, and that can range from, you know, heart disease, indigestion, an increased risk of dementia, arthritis, going through to high blood pressure, osteoporosis, erectile dysfunction, and more recently, probably COVID. So, you know, we're not saying, you know, that it's an absolute black and white, but, you know, and as different diseases are influenced by different lifestyle factors to a different scale. But there is an element, and, you know, this is what I'm trying to sort of emphasize. And a lot of these, some of these you could say are lifestyle related diseases, are costing enormous amounts of money for the country. You know, £1 billion a year spent on statins alone, 80 million on laxatives. You know, when you could argue that you could perhaps advise dietary changes and avoid laxatives and save 80 million pounds, you know, which you could spend on, you know, a tank or something, you know, something relevant. That's a joke, by the way. And the benefit and the problem is getting worse. Although the overweight rate is not increasing, the obesity rate is increasing dramatically. And over the last, you know, 20, 30 years, it's almost doubled. So the amount of very obese people is going up, and the amount of morbidly obese people are going up. The diabetes is becoming a massive problem internationally, and it's almost, again, tripled over the last 40 years. And diabetes has enormous consequences in increased risk of cancer, heart disease, dementia, as well as the cost of treating the disease itself. So the problem is not going away. For cancer itself, CRUK estimate that probably about 40 to 50% of cancers could have been avoided if people lived a perfect lifestyle. So they are relevant, but it's still uncertain what aspects of lifestyle are important. And, you know, people get information over the garden fence, which is often incorrect or exaggerated. And on the other end of the scale, you get, you know, so much information being blasted at everyone from different quarters, the internet, various other people, that people get confused with information overload. So what we're doing as a unit is trying to find the evidence for what really matters. You know, it's hard to change your lifestyle, and you want to know, if you're going to do it, does it really matter? And you know, we don't have all that information. So this is what we're doing as a unit. We're communicating with patients to say, you know, what matters to them, what sort of type of changes would they be willing to do, how could they do it. So we're doing a lot of surveys with patients. We're doing some phase 2 studies, phase 3 studies, and ultimately randomized controlled trials to get the grade 1 evidence. And what do we do with this data? Well, we write in medical journals, we advise many of the patient advocacy groups like Macmillan what goes in their information leaflets, and we write various blogs. And usually what's the subject of the blog is prompted by the questions we're getting asked. So, you know, we had a lot of questions about high dose vitamin C, so we'll do an evidence review on that. We had some questions recently about, should we fast during chemotherapy to improve outcomes? So we'll review the evidence, and obviously the sort of recurring question of, you know, is cannabis as a big wonder drug? So we'll review the evidence so people can read it and decide for themselves whether they want to sort of do these strategies. And the main things we concentrate on at the moment are obesity, gut health, chronic inflammation, polyphenol-rich foods or fruit and veg, exercise, and sugar intake to improve the chances of surviving cancer, and also reducing the toxicities which plague people after a diagnosis. And also now with COVID, you know, possibly branching out to reducing the impact of this terrible virus. But what we've done is not new, you know, we're not unique. I mean, there's people all over the world doing similar research. And in fact, Stephen Paget at the turn of the century said quite clearly, while many researchers have been studying the seed, the properties of the soil, which is our bodies, are going to reveal valuable insights into cancer. And EJC, in summarizing 50 years of research, said, as a scientist should be focusing more on why some organs and individuals allow cancer to progress and metastasize and others don't. So it's the body itself. We need to improve the terrain, improve our ability to fight it, rather than just concentrating on killing the cancer cells. And even recently, the response to these new wonderful monoclonal antibodies, which are gaining these amazing response rates in diseases which previously were difficult to treat. Even then, in ASCO last year, the world's biggest cancer conference, trials were showing that people who were fitter, had better gut health, had a 40% better response to these new drugs, and their tolerability is significantly better. So this is a big, important field now in oncology, to try to arm patients and prepare patients for treatment. So let's start with exercise. You know, why is exercise? What's the evidence? Well, there's been lots and lots. This is a summary of 45 studies which show if you manage to exercise to a reasonable degree of intensity, up to 3 hours a week, you will have a 30% on average chance of improved, that your cancer doesn't relapse. And no study has shown that exercise really does any harm. So that's a good target to have. So why does exercise have an anti-cancer property or anti-cancer properties? This was a paper we wrote with Stacey Kenfield from California, who's the guru of exercise in the United States. And this was in preparation of called the GAP4 study, where we're trying to introduce exercise as a therapy alongside cancer treatments. And we split them up into indirect and direct mechanisms. Well, exercise does help with weight loss marginally. If you exercise outside, it improves your vitamin D levels and improves your circadian rhythm, which is important if you exercise in the morning. It improves your mood, and it also improves your gut health. And if anyone wants the full paper, it's in British Journal of Sports Medicine there. There's enormous amounts, there's about 150 biochemical changes happen when you exercise, and most of these have anti-cancer properties. I won't bore you with the technical terms for this, And as I said, you can look them up yourself. But effectively, if you're overweight, it reduces estrogen levels even before you lose weight. It improves hormones such as insulin-like growth factor, which encourages cancer cells to grow faster and spread. It improves insulin sensitivity. It actually improves oxidative stress. It enhances the antioxidant enzymes, and it reduces excess chronic inflammation. All factors which are very important in the cancer pathway. So it's a fantastic anti-cancer mechanism, as well as making you feel good. Now, it's not without some risks. Can you all see these slides, by the way? Because yeah, I mean, one of our consultants in Bedford went for a run the other day and actually fell over about 10 minutes later and grazed her face and broke her arm. And that's because people don't tend to prepare for exercise. So you really, if you're not used to running or jogging, it's very important to do some core strength exercises and balance exercises, because you don't want you tripping on the pavement. And it does happen, you know, so try to prepare for exercise. Also, when you exercise, it's very important to say what your targets are. And that's why if you can join an exercise group or a supervised group with a personal trainer, it would be better. Because if you're trying to protect against osteoporosis, you need to do weight-bearing exercise. If it's more a stress release, you need to sort of join yoga classes, etc. Or if you're just using weight, you need to get your heart and lungs pumping whenever you go out. So it's very important to sort of know your targets and get supervision and get preparation. Just for the people who are very interested in sort of the technicalities of exercise, there is some sort of, some of the more biochemically minded of you will say, well, you know, when you exercise, you need energy, and oxidative species or free radicals, which damage DNA, is produced when you produce too much energy. So this hasn't come out well, this slide, but so basically when you start exercising, you actually produce these free radicals which can damage your DNA, but then your body through negative feedback enhances the antioxidant enzymes, and then you get this period where it's just working really fine. Everything's working well. If you then overdo it, like these super overtrained athletes, you actually do increase your free radicals, and that can damage your DNA. So it's very important to sort of build up gradually and then exercise to a reasonable level, but not overdo it. It's very important. Diet is always neglected. If you exercise, you need to take the foods which will enhance the antioxidant enzymes. So lots of polyphenol, colorful foods, minerals and vitamins to make sure your body can respond to the slight stress, initial stress of exercise. So when do you start? This was an initiative run by Macmillan and the Royal College of Anaesthetists, trying to emphasize the data, which is already out there, that if you were going to start cancer treatments or have an operation, there's a significant benefit to being fitter. You have less thrombotic events, less infections, reduced time in hospitals. And more recently, they've shown that fitter people are less likely to catch COVID in hospital. So, you know, that's, you know, we need more research on that. And obviously not everyone, if they need an emergency operation, can exercise much beforehand. But if you do have opportunities, it is really good to try to exercise before you start treatments in a thing called prehabilitation. And there's, over the next few years, I think what you will see is a lot more hospitals, you know, putting people into programs as soon as possible. During chemotherapy, patients are often told to sort of take it easy. This study from Holland showed the opposite. If you exercise fairly intensively, actually, during chemotherapy, I know it's difficult because everyone's feeling sick and lethargic, but if you manage to do it, your hemoglobin stays up, your white cell counts stay higher, you're less likely to get nausea and fatigue. So, you know, there's no barrier if you can do it, but, you know, it's not everyone can. This was a study during radiotherapy. Or 400 men. We looked at 400 men and we looked to see if they exercised or not during radiotherapy. The biggest factor to whether they had late toxicities, as well as smoking, was whether they exercised. So they were more likely to get keep their erections, less likely to get incontinent and rectal damage. So, you know, it's very important if you're going for a course of radiotherapy to try to exercise during the course and afterwards. I've already mentioned obesity. The more I give patients hormones and things, the more I realize obesity is not just about overeating, which of course is an element, but there's enormous factors to why some people struggle with their weight and others don't. And it's very, naive to think you can just say to people, stop eating so much and exercise more, because there's mood and mental health issues, there's genetic factors. You give a man, you take a man's testosterone away with Zoladex or something, and 80% of cases within a month have put on half a stone. So there's a biological element to weight gain, which we should be more sympathetic to. But there are some tips which can help, and these are my 3 top tips. One would be, and this is based on studies which have been published, one would be overnight fasting. If you can, have your evening meal at 7 or 8 o'clock or whatever, and try to go 13 hours before your breakfast, you've done effectively a fast every day, which has its own benefits as well. But also, we know from this study published in JAMA that it reduces your glycosylated hemoglobin, it reduces your inflammatory markers, and in this study actually reduced the risk of relapse of breast cancer. Walking before breakfast, even if it's 10 minutes, would be a way of extending that fast and using up the energy so your body looks for the reserves, and also reducing processed sugar intake, which is it's getting more, we're seeing the risk of it more and more, but I think it's still underestimated. When you have processed sugar, particularly on an empty stomach, you get this massive release of insulin, which you then get a drop in your sugar levels an hour and a half later. You feel hungry, fatigued, and you eat more. So overall, your calories go up. That increase in sugar actually also increases inflammation and damages gut health, which also has effects on your body wanting to keep as many calories on board as it can. We know that you could say, well, what about fruit? Well, we know the polyphenols and the fiber in fruit, these are the things which give it its color and smell. They have direct anti-sugar benefits. So they reduce the transport of sugar across the gut wall, and they increase the gut, the bulk of the food. So we know that if you eat these foods, despite having some sugar in it, you do not get this rise in the glycemic index, and you don't have an increased diabetes rate. So what do we do as a unit? This is our Primrose unit where I work. And this is your average sort of display of no fruit and lots of sugar. So we're not really leading by example there. And in fact, we found some goodie bags donated to patients with good intention, containing what's on your top right of the slide there. So, that would be the worst thing you can give to someone during chemotherapy. And this was allowed. And I got in big trouble from people to confiscate these bags. I was seen as a demon. But anyway, I think I've managed to do it. But every time you turn your back, there's another bag somewhere. So what we did a study in Bedford where we replaced the sugar and sweets with fruit and berries and nuts. We did this for 3 months. We had a reasonable uptake. About 75% of the staff managed to get on board. And what we saw was quite amazing. We saw a significant reduction in weight from the staff. Mood increased. And when we asked the patients what you thought of it, 94% said that was a really good gesture, and it was seen that we were leading by example, and they would change their diet as a consequence. So I'm urging people who work in oncology units, please to hide the sweets. You can keep them in the drawer, but don't have them on public display. Gut health. We know the gut, we have a thing called a microbiome with trillions of bacteria all over our body, in our lungs, in our gut. And that's determined very much by our lifestyle choices. And in fact, there's more genetic material which comes from alien bacteria than our own bacteria. Yet we hardly talk about it. We know that if you have a poor gut health, you're more likely to get food intolerances, inflammatory bowel disease, bloating, and even bowel cancer. But also systemically, you're more likely to get fatigue, arthritis, dementia, and cancers elsewhere. And I've already mentioned that you have a poorer tolerance to these new immune therapies. So how can you influence your gut? Well, there's various things. First of all, eat lots of friendly bacteria, and you can get these in foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, which is unpasteurized, natto, kefir, things like that. You need the prebiotics to feed them, and the prebiotics are things which feed the healthy bacteria, and they would be consistent of prebiotic polyphenols, which you get in things like turmeric, broccoli, mushrooms, and the fermented soluble fibers, which you get in beans and fruit and veg, beans, things like that. But also, if you're stressed, if you don't exercise, if you smoke, if you eat burnt meat and you eat sugar, they're all things which damage gut health. Is there a role for probiotic supplements? I think there is, if it's well made, but the trouble is there's lots of different types out there, but not all the time. If you have good gut health, you don't need to take a supplement. But if you're going into hospital, if you've just finished a course of chemo or radiotherapy, if you've had a lot to drink alcohol-wise, or if you've had recent antibiotics, I think there is a role for a short-term probiotics, and this is the one we select because it's quite safe, and it's just got mainly lactobacillus, which enhance. All they do is feed the guts lining, and they produce a substance called butyrate, which then feeds the other healthy bacteria without trying to be too fancy. I've mentioned polyphenols and phytochemicals a lot. These are foods which are colorful or tasty, and there's lots of evidence that population who eat a lot of these, including what we call the phytoestrogenic food like soya, they have a lower risk of developing cancer. And there's been 2 evidence reviews there if anyone's interested in reading them. So there's no doubt about that these foods are highly beneficial. How do they work? Well, I've already said they can improve gut health. They can actually have direct benefits in promoting the healthy genes. It's called epigenetic expressions of the genes we're born with. They reduce the diabetic risk, and they can reduce chronic inflammation and enhance the antioxidative pathways. And this is some of the other research we do. I'll just go through it quickly. This was a study where we looked at 155,000 people over 10 years, and we looked to see if they drank tea or not. And I'm pleased to report if you drank tea, you have a lower risk of prostate cancer. The same obviously applied to broccoli. I don't think anyone's surprised about that. So how can you increase your polyphenol intake? Well, you can have lots of fruit and veg. You can liquidize it, and just sprouting beans increases your levels, shots. When you do liquidize food, make sure you don't have too much fruit, because that does break the fruit down and it does increase the sugar levels a bit too much. So as I say, in California, you juice your vegetables and you eat your fruit. Supplements, well, there is a role in some cases. It is a convenient way to boost your intake of these whole foods, especially if you're off your food or you don't have the capacity to eat such a varied diet. And we know they're very popular. We know that 64% of patients, this was a study we presented in Adelaide, do take supplements, especially if they have symptoms like hot flushes, joint pains, etc., which is obviously common. The problem is that not all supplements are healthy. These were studies showing that vitamin E and vitamin A containing supplements actually increased your risk of cancer. So we want to avoid that because they're direct antioxidants. Unlike whole foods, which enhance the antioxidant pathways, these are direct antioxidants which should be avoided. Too much vitamin B has also been shown to cause problems. So the general rule is, and this is supported by organizations like Memorial Sloan Kettering, unless you know you have a vitamin deficiency, you should not be taking extra supplement. The only exception for that would be vitamin D, because most of us in Britain are vitamin D deficient. And there's no study showing that reasonable amounts of vitamin D does any harm. So I do encourage patients to take vitamin D, especially during the winter. This was one study we did looking at a whole food supplement with green tea, broccoli. Again, these are not chemicals, they are not vitamins. And this was a randomized study in men with prostate cancer, where they took a supplement for 6 months, and there was a very highly statistical difference in the levels of PSA, a marker of their prostate cancer, which correlated with underlying measurements of their tumor on MRI. So we know that boosting the diet can help people, but we're not saying you would boost your diet with a supplement over a diet and lifestyle, which of course is the #1 priority. And this was just the National Cancer Institute in California, which is one of the best institutes in the world. does highlight this study and recommend it to patients, so this is good. But these foods, these elements, phytochemicals are not just in foods we eat. It can be things we put on our body, like cosmetics or nail balms. And this is a side effect of Taxotere, a drug given for lung and breast cancer, which was largely ignored, and patients just had to put up with it. And there was nothing really available except some cooling gloves, which the nurses don't like using. So we thought, well, some of these phytochemicals have antioxidant, they have antimicrobial and DNA repair properties. So we managed to get a company to supply a balm which contained mainly natural essential oils and natural oils. And we did a randomized study looking at applying this to the nail beds before and during chemotherapy. We presented this in ASCO 2 years ago, and it showed a very highly significant difference in the toxicity to the nails. You may think it's a small thing, but anyone who's lost their nails during chemotherapy wouldn't say to that, because a lot of people point down that that's one of the worst side effects they had. We're very pleased that just looking at nature, using natural products, you can actually almost stop it in nearly all cases. And we're very pleased with that study. COVID, we've already heard that it's been devastating to, you don't need anyone to point that out. In terms of cancer, we are seeing later people coming, presenting later because they've had trouble getting to the GP or they wouldn't want to bother anyone. We've had more younger patients coming through as well, and we can't quite explain that, which is very troubling. And obviously, patients are coming in for their bone scan and CTs, etc., and coming out with a positive COVID, and they've had to isolate and delay the start of chemotherapy. So it's caused a lot of issues. But as I said before, it is well known that if you are, if you're in your 40s, female, not overweight, with a good diet, the chances of COVID being fatal is probably less than 1 in 10,000. Yet if you're over 70 and you have a poor diet and overweight with diabetes, it's about 13%. So, there's a very big difference between the people affected by COVID. Again, we're not blaming anyone for catching it, but the probability is if you are fitter and you have a better diet, you are less likely to develop the consequences, and particularly the long-term consequences. And interestingly, because we've done a lot of work on polyphenol-rich foods, we've now looked at which foods could possibly have a protective element. And there's lots of data from the previous SARS epidemic to show that these polyphenol-rich foods have direct antiviral properties. And the chamomile, for example, and citrus bioflavonoids, they not only help with gut health, which also protects you, they have direct antiviral properties. What we don't know is, could you change your diet now and prevent a COVID infection now? We know changing your diet now could prevent chronic diseases later in life and improve your outcomes from cancer, but could it have an impact on the chance of catching COVID or another similar virus over the next year? So we've set up a study now called the UK Phyto-V study, where we've worked with various nutritionalists from around the UK, and we've found 4 foods which probably have the best impact and antiviral impact, and that's turmeric, aloe, chamomile, and pomegranate. As well as citrus bioflavonoids. And we're combining that with a probiotic supplement, and we're giving that to people who've had COVID, and are still suffering the long-term consequences. And we're seeing if this could shorten the duration of illness and prevent this relapse into long COVID. And we've just finished, we've just got 140 patients in this study so far, so we don't have the results yet, but I'm just pointing that out, and maybe watch this space. So this was a whistle-stop tour of what we're doing. There's thousands of other studies which I haven't mentioned, thousands of other factors, and I've probably gone through it a bit too fast. But if you want to follow what we do, you just click on blog.cancernet, or you can email me, or look on any of our social media. We try, if we come across a study which may be relevant to patients, You know, it could be from cannabis to fasting to which superfoods are the latest trend. We try to promote it with a link to the original trial on the social media. So thank you very much for listening, and I would love to hear your criticisms or questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Professor Thomas. That was a fantastic talk. And as you can see, everyone's clapping. They really enjoyed it. The chat was also full of conversation. And so, you know, we do have questions for you, if that's okay with you.
Yes, of course.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So I have a question from Balwinda, and it is, how about the emotional and psychological effects? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't stress that. I should have. There was a study from California looking at men with prostate cancer. And it was a study of over 30,000 men. They did a psychological analysis. They found there was a much higher instance of psychological morbidity than doctors appreciated or nurses appreciated. So it was up to about 20%. And when they looked at those people with psychological problems, there was about a 20% increase in their cancer relapsing, independent of what type of cancer they had and the other risk factors. So psychological morbidity on its own, independently, will increase your risk of relapse. Now, all I've done now is make everyone really anxious, and they're going to get more worried about their cancer coming back. But that's the reality. So yeah, it's really important, and it's underemphasized. But, you know, it's hard for, you know, busy chemo nurses, doctors, etc., to sort of, you know, it's not an easy fix, is it, to put someone in a better mood? You can say, go for a run and eat less sugar, which is the limit of what I say, to be honest. But, you know, I think it should be, you know, I think everyone should be screened, and there should be psychological programs if we had the resources. So, yeah, it's a very important question and underemphasized.
Thank you so much for your question, Balwinda, and thank you, Professor Thomas, for that fantastic answer. We have a comment here. It's not a question, but I just wanted to, you know, make sure you heard it. It says, nice to have an oncologist that provides a holistic approach. And I know that a lot of people in the room will feel that sentiment for sure. Okay.
Thank you for that. I mean, I try not to, because we're very busy in Bedford and Cambridge already, and that's my loyalty to them. But we do get patients from around the country. What you don't want to do is say, just because you're interested in self-help strategies and information, that doesn't mean you're supporting, you know, not having your breast lump removed surgically. You know, that's a completely different end of the spectrum. And that's also what I want to emphasize. But, you know, some people have different choices. And if they choose not to, say, have adjuvant chemotherapy, they should be respected, as long as they know the risk they're putting themselves through, but also support them as much as possible with those decisions. And I think that's, you know, we're not paternalistic. Our job is to advise, and patients do effectively what they feel comfortable with.
Thank you so much. Jill H says, you caution against over-exercise causing inflammation. How do we know when we're overdoing it, as we all need to push ourselves?
Yes, we do. We do need to push ourselves. I mean, I exercise a lot, but, you know, if it's raining outside and dark, you know, it's pretty hard to sort of motivate yourself to go out. Generally speaking, unless you're an extreme cyclist or athlete, it's pretty hard to over-exercise. You know, so most of the time we're trying to encourage people to exercise. So I don't want to emphasize that too much. Nevertheless, if you've not exercised at all in your life and you suddenly decide to go on a rowing machine and go like the clappers, you probably are doing more harm than good. So it's very important to, you know, to eat well, make sure you have lots of fruit and veg before exercising, or teas. You see people in gyms now having tea. It's a common sort of nutritional beetroot, all the colorful foods. So just try to use some common sense. You know, if you're going to go for a walk, you just say, well, I'll do 1 mile today, I'll do 2 miles, you know, 3 days later. Allow your muscles to recover before you go into your next intensive regime. So, but the easiest way is join an exercise class, or get an exercise professional if you can afford it, because they will look at your body, they will talk to you about your problems, but not everyone has the access to that or the money to get one. But, you know, try not to be put off. It's always good to push yourself a little bit.
We had Sue James saying that she's enjoying the online exercise classes. We've got a few people that are definitely doing some of those. I've got a question here from Sarah Maple Durham. It says here a recent American article reported that saturated fats are not as bad as you previously thought. Also, many substituted saturated fats for carbohydrates, so increases the risk of diabetes. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, fats were vilified for many years for no real reason at all, to be honest. I mean, saturated, as you'll see in the book, fats are quite complicated. Saturated fats have the most energy. So, of course, if you're struggling with weight, saturated fats should be avoided because they will increase the risk of putting on weight. However, they're an excellent source of other fat-soluble vitamins. And they're a slow-release energy source, unlike sugar. So if you're not struggling with weight, it would be better to have fats rather than carbohydrate or sugars. But the trouble is most of us are struggling with weight, and that's why they've been criticized. So yeah, and if you have sugar, for example, what happens is your body, it creates this stress, this oxidative stress and inflammation, and your body thinks it's under attack. So that it then decides to try and keep as much energy on board. There's a natural cycle of excreting fats as well, which if you have sugar is blocked. So yeah, I eat particularly plant-based fats. I mean, saturated fats can be animals and plants. So, avocados, coconuts, these are all saturated fats from plants. Also, people are getting mixed up with saturated fats from meat. Meat saturated fats are harmful for other reasons. They actually can be carcinogenic and they promote inflammation. So it's not the fat itself, it's the source, also how it's prepared and the quantity.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So Fiona Carey says, during COVID, I've taken up virtual seated boxing to replace my wheelchair basketball. It's definitely high impact and I'm doing it 6 times a week now. I'm addicted. Perfect.
I love to hear that you can still exercise even if you're in a wheelchair, which is great news, good motivation.
Fantastic. I also have another question for you. It says, is it still the case that cancer patients are sent to the best treatment centre for them and not just to the nearest hospital? It may not be a question that you're able to answer, but
Yeah, I get this. It's a good question. I get this a lot. I mean, fortunately, in the UK, because we have national guidelines, and this post-road lottery of drugs is gone. We get central funding, so every cancer centre in Britain should have the same access to drugs and radiotherapy, etc. There's always going to be a variation with different personalities and different doctors and things. Certainly for surgery, it's perhaps more important. But again, that's changed over the last 20 years. If you need your bladder taken out, for example, you're not going to get that done in Bedford or Milton Keynes. You're going to go to a big tertiary centre like Oxford or Cambridge or London or Birmingham. So so I think it's less important. It's more, it's good to go to your local place because that's where your local services are. Don't try to I see lots of problems with patients saying, I've got to go to this centre in Europe, I've got to go to this centre in America. And it leads to a lot of stress. And at the end of the day, I think they would have got pretty similar treatment just, down the road. So, we're quite lucky in Britain for that. I mean, the NHS, that's a good part of the NHS, I would agree with.
Oh, thank you so much. I didn't know that you'd be able to answer it, but I'm grateful that you were. Thank you. I have a more difficult question that I'm going to ask. Again, it went in the chat, it went to everybody. And please feel free to say that you can answer it later or that we can send them information if necessary. But this comes from Hannah Bello, and she says, how do I broach the complexity for patients around blame? I know that I recalled at the start of your talk regarding how a perfect lifestyle could affect developing cancer. Most cancer patients have heard every cure and preventer. And so I imagine it can be a minefield reaching patients with these factual changes. Do you ever get patients' opinions on your approach?
yeah, you have to, you have to be careful. I mean, the last thing you'd want to do is blame people. You don't, someone with lung cancer, you don't come in and say, well, you had lung cancer because you smoked. The damage is done already, so you're not creating anything. But you also don't want to say ignore it, because we know, for example, if you carry on smoking after many cancers, I'm just using that as an example, you have an increased risk of relapse and increased risk of side effects. So you can't ignore it, but but you're not doing it because you're blaming them. You just want to make sure they understand that they have options. They have abilities to help themselves. So once that message has gone over, that's it. That's the most important part. So it should be emphasized. It's not a blame mechanism. It's more of an encouragement that your lifestyle changes still matter after a diagnosis. And that's what we're emphasizing. And the reason why we're saying it is not to blame them, it's to encourage them that they have some control over their destiny. Not a complete control, but it's all about relative odds, isn't it? You can improve your odds. We get, young girls or young men who live a perfect lifestyle, having devastating cancer, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yet, of course, there's the other side where you can clearly see that patients could help themselves a bit better, and that's what it's important to emphasize. You have to tread lightly, and you are sticking your neck out, but someone's got to do it. And I think it's great that you as a group are embracing this and supporting each other without blaming each other.
It goes back to what you were saying before, somebody mentioning that it's really nice to have an oncologist that obviously has a holistic view, because the holistic view takes into consideration how it might feel to hear, things that might sound like blame. So that's fantastic. Thank you.
I'd like to pick up one of the questions around exercise during treatment. So Glenn is asking about how important exercise during cancer treatment is. So sort of not necessarily like the prevention, but actually whilst in treatment.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of extremes on this. I mean, 5 years ago, I was actually quite surprised in Cambridge that most of my colleagues were telling patients not to exercise. Which was odd, because there's lots of evidence now to show it's very beneficial. So I think it's a case of educating doctors as well as staff, actually, because of course, I get patients who come up to me and say, "Oh, I'm not exercising because my oncologist told me not to." And so we all need to sing from the same hymn tune. There is extremes. There's hospitals now in Phoenix in Arizona, where they're actually putting patients on exercise bikes while they're actually having their chemotherapy. Now, that's one end of the spectrum, and there is some evidence that it could improve the therapeutic ratio. It improves the blood supply into the tumor, so the chemo gets there and it protects the normal cells. I think that would be a hard one to sell in the UK. But putting some exercise bikes in the waiting room might not be a bad idea, instead of leaving people waiting for 2 hours before they see someone. But more practically, the data, especially from the Dutch trial, showed that even if you're feeling fatigued and worn out from chemotherapy, to try and do something every day, and even if you can go for a little jog or something to get you breathless, will improve your recovery, and it will not do harm. You might get an increase in fatigue initially, but overall your fatigue levels drop. And the same applies to radiotherapy and these new biologicals. So yeah, push yourself as much as you can, and it will seem terribly difficult at the beginning, but in the longer term will reap benefits.
I can see you got some thumbs up there from members of the audience. I want to pick up on 3 questions together because they're all about nutrition, if that's okay. So one is around, is it okay to take turmeric with tamoxifen? The other one is about replacing sugar with raw honey. And the other one is around how important it is to eat breakfast, as some people don't fancy eating it before having lunchtime. So
I think the breakfast thing is important, although I've said about overnight fasting. So, the trick with a breakfast, the evidence suggests if you have a good breakfast, no sugar, it's really important not to have sugar for breakfast, or honey. Sorry, honey's got lots of sugar in. You can have honey later in the day after a meal. But if you do slow release carbs or even fat for breakfast, and then you won't need to eat anything till lunchtime. So you're also then doing another fast between breakfast and lunch. Whereas if you don't have breakfast, you tend to then snack and nibble on biscuits and all sorts of things. And that snacking is the problem. So yes, it is important to have a good breakfast and then eat nothing until your lunch. Give your stomach a rest. Honey, as I said, you know, it's good. It's got some positive things, and after a meal, it's fine. But on an empty stomach, I think honey has that. It does increase your glycemic index as well. I forgot what the other question was. You said honey, breakfast.
And tamoxifen with... Oh, you're testing me today as well.
You have to differentiate between antioxidant vitamins and minerals like vitamin A and vitamin E, because there's loads of newspaper articles. Every now and again, every 3 months, a newspaper article will publish a headline, supplements cause cancer, right? And they just roll it out every 3 months, okay? And it's all because of certain trials which have shown that if you take these high dose vitamins, you have a too much of an antioxidant benefit, too much of an antioxidant problem, and you get antioxidant toxicity. And there's even doctors in Scandinavia telling people not to go and get a ginger shot from Pret a Manger because they could be carcinogenic. I mean, goodness gracious. They're telling people they can have a donut and not a ginger shot. I mean, they really haven't got their priorities. And if you look at the data for, say, turmeric, whole foods now, not extracts, whole foods, turmeric, green tea, broccoli, all those things, there's no data at all to say they interfere with cancer treatments or hormone treatments. In fact, it's the opposite. They help gut health. They help reduce chronic inflammation. So it's vastly overstated. And even if there is a tiny potential benefit, the risk, the benefits vastly outweigh them. So yes, I would take all these herbs and spices during cancer treatments. Just be careful if you're taking extracts or vitamins and minerals.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got a comment from Karen, which I just thought was really, really kind of nice. She said she loves this presentation. She's worked in diabetes with dietitians who don't eat healthily. She now works in cancer. Nutrition is never a focus. Please help this to change. It's so important that people focus on more nutrient-rich food. So you've got a lot of support in the audience here today, which is fantastic. Thank you.
I think it will. The only encouraging, it is getting more, you know, if you open medical journals, there's always a couple of papers now on exercise and nutrition. And, you know, the blame for eating turmeric during chemotherapy is getting less and less as trials are being published. You need to do the research to convince doctors. And the last 4 research trials of turmeric during chemotherapy all showed a benefit. So attitudes are changing. But the biggest change are going to be these new biologicals, which, you know, a 40% increased response rate for people with good gut health who exercise is enormous. And these drug companies are making billions of pounds a year on these drugs. So they're going to now back the lifestyle interventions, which you'd like to think is good for patients. But, you know, conspiracy theory, they're going to get 40% more profit if we can get everyone to be fitter, which is, you know, I don't care how they do it. If the end result's the same, that's great.
Absolutely. And then also, hold on, I just had it and it scrolled away because technology does that sometimes.
I'm a bit concerned though that you're getting a lot of support for these exercise bikes in waiting rooms. I've only just learned how to spell Natu and Kimchi. Now I'm recycling in the waiting room. Yeah, cheers.
I did try and get one in, but after taking away sugar from the nurses, I think that was a step too far.
I just wanted to ask you around hormones, so the role of estrogen and the view of HRT on weight and fitness that Jill has asked.
What, HRT or phytoestrogenic foods are you referring to?
I just got here, what is the role of estrogen and the view of HRT on weight and fitness?
Well, I mean, HRT does, you know, make women, postmenopausal women feel better. If they don't have a estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, you know, it should be used more often. If we've made young people postmenopausal prematurely, it should be considered, because all you're doing is replacing a natural hormone. How long you keep it for is slightly different. You know, I have a lot of conversations about relative risks in people with breast cancer, whether they should go back on it. I mean, that's a much more difficult conversation, of course. Phytoestrogenic foods, mind you, aren't risky, and women have been told to avoid soya, and chickpeas and peanuts for years after breast cancer, which is based on absolutely no evidence at all. In fact, the opposite. There's 3 large studies which showed those foods reduce the risk of breast cancer after your initial diagnosis. So yeah, so go for the, try to eat a varied diet with foods which do have natural estrogens. The opposite applies to estrogenic contaminants like plastic, car fumes. They're called xenoestrogens or aluminium, and they do promote breast cancer. So there's lots of different types of estrogen. So, but if you do, want to talk about HRT, it's going to be difficult. I have to say, GPs don't like talking about it, and many oncologists don't like talking about it. But there is a role, and the same applies for men. There's a role for giving testosterone in men, because that's a good way to improve motivation, mood, and reduce fatigue. And it's very rarely used in men, testosterone replacement. And I think there's a role there too.
Thank you. Very, very, very interesting. I also want to just pick up on another point. We were talking about exercise whilst having treatment. What about, is there any benefits of exercise for palliative patients?
Yes, but again, you need someone who's pretty skilled as an exercise professional to know exactly what you can do. And we've heard a lady in a wheelchair changing her exercise patterns. We have people from Macmillan visiting our centre, and many people say, I can't exercise because of that. You can always find something, well, not always, in majority of cases find something, even if it's just an exercise bike put onto a bed. There's always some ways to do a little bit of activity. So there's no group which it doesn't apply to.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So I wanted to say that you've had a lot of support for the talk. Generally, people are saying that they've taken copious notes, that it's a fantastic talk, that, there's even been discussion amongst the participants today here. So thank you so much. There was a question around whether this would be available, because people want to have access to everything you just shared. Obviously, the video at the beginning, that's available on YouTube, isn't it? But also, I want everyone to know that this event will also be available at some point in the future. Just before we go into a break, though, I wanted to find out, is there anything that you wanted to share with everybody, Professor Robert, before we move into the next section?
Yeah, I mean, keep up to date with our research. When we publish, we always emphasize things. We just published a trial in Japan, for example, which is going to go out in our newsletter. So if you sign up to the newsletter, you'll hear about how women after breast cancer took some foods and reduced the risk of hot flushes and mood. So that will go out on our social media. The book, I don't feel guilty promoting the book. It took me 4 years to read it. I may get 20p in issue, so I don't think I'm gaining financially. It's just that I have summarized everything I've learned over the last 20 years in that. So that's a good sort of general thing. The blog is quite good. Again, if people ask questions, we will put information or an evidence review on the blog with a sort of summary. So if patients are thinking of fasting during their chemotherapy or taking cannabis, you will have our opinion based on the available evidence. So that's a good source as well. And thank you for listening. It's been great to have such fantastic questions of everyone.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. If everyone wants to come off mute and give a round of applause, I see you all are already. So you beat me to it, everybody. Thank you so much, Professor Robert. That was fantastic.
First of all, I want to welcome you all back and thank you so much for your enthusiasm in answering questions. And we need to keep that enthusiasm up, because this event is called Being Heard. And therefore, we still want to hear from you. And we've been joined by a super panel of people who hopefully are going to be able to answer even more of your questions. And we, like I said, we'll try and get through as many as possible. I would just like to introduce you to your panel members. So today we've got Marion Foreman and Ray Anderson, who are patients and are the co-chairs of the East of England Cancer Patient Advisory Board. We've got Nick Hume, who you heard from this morning, who gave us that very personal speech, and he's the Chief Executive at East Suffolk and North East Essex Foundation Trust, and he also chairs the East of England Cancer Alliance for the North. We have Dr. Linda Hunter, who's the Associate Medical Director for Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital Trust, but also who chairs the East of England Cancer Alliance for the North. We've got Professor Peter Hoskin, who's a consultant in clinical oncology at Mount Vernon Cancer Centre. He's also a professor in clinical oncology in the University of Manchester and an honorary consultant in clinical oncology at Christie Hospital, Manchester, and the University College Hospital, London. And last, but no means least, we have Ginny Malesi, who's the head of transformation at the East of England Cancer Alliance South. So whilst they're getting ready, I am going to end this poll and show you the results, which, well, it's very lovely. We were just asking you how informative and useful you found the morning sessions, and 83% of you have said very useful. So that's great, and that also helps us when looking at maybe putting some more of these events together. So thank you for that. So I'm going to hand over to our panel of speakers, but bearing in mind I'm one of the facilitators, I get facilitator privilege. So I'm going to ask the first question, and that actually I want to invite it to Marion and to Ray. So Marion, if you go first. We've been talking a lot about members of the East of England Cancer Patient Advisory Board. What is it?
Hi, Lindsay, thank you. Yes, the Patient Advisory Board is really important. And I'll just tell you a little bit about how I came to be on it, because I think it might help other people to see the relevance to them. By background, I'm a nurse. I've been a cancer nurse, and I kind of thought I knew it. I thought that I understood cancer care and I knew what it felt like. But it wasn't until until my husband at that time, he got cancer. He has cancer. And I walked that path with him. And then I began to see what it was really all about. And it's totally different from the other side of the consulting table. And whilst, of course, we are incredibly grateful for the amazing care and treatment that he got, I was very aware that there was a voice in us that wasn't being heard in the way that I wanted it to be heard. And from that, I went on to think that being alive is absolutely fantastic, but picking up on something that Nick said earlier, time really matters. And it really struck a note when Nick said about all the appointments and the amount of time that we've spent traveling to the hospital, sitting in the waiting room. And you thought the lived experience of our cancer journey can be different and can be better. And that's what the Patient Advisory Board is about. It's about the lived experience, about what matters to us as patients and carers, and what we want the people that deliver that care to hear, and how we want to help to make it as best as we possibly can for as many patients as we can. So it's about co-production and having a bit of a say in that care and how it's delivered. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you. Ray, would you like to add anything to that, bearing in mind you're the co-chair?
Just a couple of things. First of all, this event is partially to encourage people to think about joining the Patient Advisory Board. We need people with more recent experience of cancer diagnoses and treatments, and we would like to be more diverse. As you can probably see from the picture, I'm old, male, white and stale, and we could do with some people who look a little different if it's all the same to you. The other thing that I would say to patients out there who may think that they're in any way isolated, they're not. There are networks of patients all over the East of England, and if you don't know how to get into one, then you can always ask, if you're having treatment, your cancer nurse specialist, who can point you in the right direction. And for those who are interested in joining the Patient Advisory Board, the Alliance's revised website launched on Friday, and if you go to the patient section of that website, you will find out how you can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Now, I have a question which I'm going to ask. Let's go to Professor Peter Hoskin first. It's a question around when will cancer surgery resume?
Well, so I think the important point to make there is that cancer surgery has continued throughout COVID. Certainly, there was perhaps a small hiatus in the first wave, but since then it has continued. Not quite as before, but many operations have been undertaken. In the east of England, I think we now have a very clear system of monitoring patients, and patients who require urgent surgery all require urgent surgery within the time limits that are set for them. We have had a great deal of help from the independent sector, private hospitals, where surgical teams have decamped to and been able to continue their surgical activity in the private hospitals, whilst the NHS hospitals were dealing with the COVID problems. And we also have developed in the east of England a system of what's called mutual aid. So mutual aid is very simply, if one hospital has a space and the other hospital has a patient for them, that patient is offered a space at that other hospital. I say offered, so they can decline and decide to wait longer, but we do all we can to maximize the use of all the resources and indeed the resources of surrounding alliances. So we have very close contact with the London alliances and also with those in the Midlands. So I think it's true to say that certainly at the present time, all patients who require cancer surgery in what we call it within the 28 days should be in a position to have a date for that surgery.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've got a direct question that come to me, so I'm not going to read out the person's name just in case they wanted to be anonymous. But I'd like to actually ask Nick Hume this question. And it says, it's from a patient that says, I've personally had very little emotional support from my hospital, which is Colchester General. I'd love to be able to find out more about groups that can assist and I can voice my concerns. What advice are you going to give?
Thank you for the question, and I'm sorry that you don't feel as though you've been offered sufficient emotional support. That's just not good enough. There are groups that exist, but I think the point was made earlier that groups aren't right for everybody, and I think it's really important that we have a more bespoke offer for people who are dealing with the emotional consequences and indeed their family. As I've said many times, it's got me into a lot of trouble, which means I say it just a little bit more. The NHS is a perfectly designed system to meet the needs of the people that work in it. So we offer a service, and if your needs happen to meet the service we offer, lucky, happy days. If not, then we're not as flexible perhaps as we could be. So I think that that if we haven't been able to offer you that specific emotional support, then it would be really helpful for me to know what that would look like, what that would feel like for you, and then we can use the range of services. I think that it's quite complicated sometimes to understand all the range of services, both within the hospital, but most importantly, the third sector, the voluntary sector partners that we work so closely with through the Alliance and elsewhere. So my email address is on the front of the website. If you'd like to email me, I can perhaps talk to you about what that would look like for you, and then make sure you're getting the right emotional support, both for you and for your loved ones.
Thank you for that. Also, Dashka said that that Macmillan obviously have a lot of support groups as well, but I appreciate this one was specific to Colchester, which is why I wanted to sort of raise that with yourself. Nick, while I still have you, I just want to say Paul Osmond's asked a question. You told us around the 14 waitings for 14 days, 31 days and 62-day delivery stages was intolerable. Are there any possibilities to reduce those target stages? Ooh.
So I'm not aware of any current conversations happening nationally. There are conversations happening around the ED target and around the NE target and around 18 weeks. But from my understanding, talking to the national team, there isn't an expectation. To some extent, Paul, I'm not sure it really matters. And I think there's a real danger that once you set a target, you chase the target. And so we congratulate ourselves on the mediocrity of delivering against those targets. For me, The mindset needs to be, how can we work with patients to see you as quickly as we possibly can, but in a time frame that suits you? Because for some people, having a rush of that treatment option being delivered can be too quick. So we need to negotiate that. I'm less interested about changing the target, but looking at systems and processes to see you as quickly as possible. Yes, there's an advantage around working on those targets, and it gives us some idea about how we're performing nationally. But the ambition, the drive, the innovation needs to come from the staff working in the services, supported by leaders, to see people as quickly as possible and not chase the target. So I don't think there's any move to change them. I think it's the minimum standard rather than the target. So if we look at it that way and say, how do we shift all of our resources into seeing people as quickly, as safely as possible, negotiate occasionally the time for starting treatment or receiving diagnosis, when's the best time for you, who do you need around you, what support. I worked in HIV and AIDS for 10 years and spent a lot of time giving sadly positive diagnosis, and this was in the 80s in a very different clinical, and the rule was you never give results on a Friday because the NHS aren't around on a Saturday. Great. Well, actually, maybe your family's around on the Saturday, and that's where you're going to get your support. So having any hard and fast rules about support or diagnosis or times needs to be negotiated with the individual patient and their family.
Thank you so much. Do you know what? That answer was fantastic, and it had me thinking about this question that's just come through. So Iris said, how can we encourage all of our oncologists to follow a more holistic approach during consultations? And I would love to ask that question, have that question answered both from clinicians and also from patients that are on the panel, because I think they're going to be two different experiences, aren't they? Marion, do you want to kick us off? You're muted.
Thanks, Shay. Yes, I think the element of psychological support is an imperative, because you can do what you like to the body, but if the mind isn't following, then we're in a muddle. And we heard Professor Thomas talk a lot about how important that aspect is and how to enhance that with a variety of physical things as well. And I think a real important thing is to capture some of that and to understand some of the psychological challenges that patients and their families are up against. It is incredibly difficult from that moment, I would say even before diagnosis, when you think there might be something wrong and all the things that go through your head. And then when you get that diagnosis, the absolute shift that has to occur somewhere along the line, that you have to somehow embrace everything that's going to happen and what that means to you. And whilst the oncologists and their team are absolutely brilliant at the physical manifestations and dealing with those, you really, really need that support and an unbiased support that doesn't suggest that you're having some sort of breakdown. It's just that it's really very difficult and you need help and support at the right place at the right time. If not, all the medicine in the world isn't going to make you feel any better unless we're addressing those deep-seated psychological needs, which we have to measure and help people with. And oncologists are in the front line of that.
So before I ask the rest of the panel to jump in on that question, I'm going to actually slightly adapt Iris's question to say, is it actually possible for patients to encourage their oncologist to have a holistic view?
I think it's imperative that the patient says, this is what I need. And this is what the patient advisory board is all about. It's about the lived experience, about making the experience as good as we possibly can. It's hard and it's tough. And we've all got to work together on this. And oncologists are a key part of that.
Ray, I think you were going to pop up.
Yeah, just to say that I was extremely lucky in the oncologist that I worked with during my chemotherapy. He was of the school of tell them like it is, but keep it jolly. And he certainly knew the importance of, looking at the patient's needs and delivering something which was suitable.
Can I just come in on that
Yes.
point? I think to be honest, it would be unrealistic to expect an oncologist to be all things to all patients. Some of them are incredibly personal and really good with patients, and frankly, some of them aren't. And we need to just accept that. The key for me is about the multidisciplinary team. to expect everything to come from one individual, no matter how sublimely talented, clever, funny, intelligent, whatever, or personal they might be, it is a team. So if the oncologist isn't able to take that more holistic view, we need to look at where else in the team that could be. Is it the clinical nurse specialist? Is it the volunteers from Macmillan? Is it the rest of the team? So I think it comes back to really individualizing the care. But that's about the skill of the clinician understanding that relationship, understanding their needs. And then creating the care with both the individual and the team around the bespoke needs of the individual. So we move away from this NHS delivering the care that we want to offer, and if it suits you, great. But if it doesn't, you're going to suffer.
Really, really powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Eileen. I just want to say though that the service is quite bad. So and we're not getting everything you're saying. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing your comments in the chat, we will make sure that, you know, everybody gets a chance to see them and understand them. I hope that's okay. Thank you so much though. I got a tiny bit of what you were saying. You were saying that work has been done, but if you could share more detail in the chat, I would love to share that with our panel. Thank you.
Can we also ask that question to Linda, please? We'd really love to hear your view on that.
Thank you. I think I would actually just totally concur with what Nick said, that actually it's best to view what different skills individuals have within the cancer teams and how collectively they can support patients. I have to say, Ray, I'm disappointed though that you had that experience, and I'm sure that Peter would say the same thing. But I think it's why it's really important that we do continue to have a dialogue with patients in a meaningful way, and actually this event is one piece of the work that all of our patient reps are doing, but also I hope everyone, you know, Marion and Ray and Lindsay, feel that they are involved in all of the work that we do with the Alliance in trying to influence the care for patients. And I think we've tried to be very open to both internally to scrutiny for the work we're doing for the improvements for patients, and you know, Ray and Marion have got seats on I think all of the tables when we're discussing things, and actually are very honest and open, and I think that's what we continue to need to have, are open reflections about the quality of services and care. And so, you know, as Ray said, you know, we are actively looking for more, and, you know, help us to help you. If you're having experiences where you feel actually there is something that is missing, or actually if you have an experience where you think, gosh, that was absolutely brilliant, the more we know about that, the more we can try and influence all of the services in our patch.
Thanks. I just want to echo what Linda has said, that Ray and I are on multiple boards, and the more that we can hear from other people about their experience, the more we can take to the boards, the more we can take back to people who are dealing with cancer. So it's really important to hear from everybody about what's happening and what matters to them, because we are heard in the boards. And I think it'd be fair to say that when we first started, sometimes we were the token patient. That is certainly never, ever the case now. Our opinions are actively sought, and we stand alongside everybody else. And it's really important that we represent everybody. It's not just what I think or what Ray thinks, it's what everybody who's on this call thinks. And the more you tell us, the more we'll be able to say, this is what's happening, this is what matters, and this is what we like, this is what we'd like to change. We're heard, respected, and as we say, we co-produce now. So Linda's totally right with everything that she says.
Thank you. And I just wanted to pop up quickly to read Eileen's comment, because obviously we couldn't hear her, and because of the nature of the panel, we're just taking comments in the comment chat box. She says, I've attended one such meeting and understand how difficult it is to include the patient, but we do need to get involved in the discussions about how patients are involved in the MDT decision. So Joanna Talboy says, where do we go when treatment is offered too little, too late? Linda, do you have anything to say to that question?
We might need a little bit more behind actually the question. So the implication of it is, it could be many things, couldn't it? Is it that it's a cancer that's been picked up late and people feel there could have been more things done to actually speed the diagnosis up, to avoid it being a later stage cancer? Is it that someone's got into a hospital setting and they don't feel they've had an opportunity to get certain treatments for their care? So I think you can look at that in potentially different ways. I mean, I think if whoever submitted that would like to put some more around that, very happy to respond, and I'm sure that Peter and Nick will too. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that although a lot of the work we do does involve hospital services, that we are trying to do a lot out of hospital. So we do try and influence people like public health for things, you know, for things like smoking cessation programs, for the screening programs, because actually there is a lot of importance in us trying to see if we can get the number of our patients that have cancer diagnosed at a much earlier stage. We're working, you know, with, as I say, public health, with local CCGs and also with the primary care networks with GPs, because actually an important bit about improving outcomes is actually managing the diagnosis quicker. And that's not all about just how quickly things happen when you hit a hospital. It's more about how can we encourage people, give information about actually if you have got certain symptoms, we really need to see you to see whether you have or not, and bring that forward, and also to try and increase the amount of patients that do attend for their screening, because that's probably one of the most effective ways of trying to pick a cancer up early, so that actually there will be a maximum chance of someone having a treatment which is a curative thing. So I've probably gone a little bit off piece there, but if there's more detail that whoever's asked the question wants to put in, that would be great.
So she's just added a bit, which is, you know, I'm really sorry for your experience, Joanna. I'm about to express it to everybody. So she said, my nephew died at 42 with cancer that had spread from the cancer of the esophagus and was left as it was the start of the pandemic. His appointments were constantly cancelled. He died in September 2020. So I guess that's where her perspective is coming from on that question.
So shall I start with an answer to that, and then Peter and Nick may want to come in. So the first thing is also to say that I'm so sorry, because that's awful, and your brother was very, very young as well. It would have been awful whatever age, but that is a really young age. And I think one of the things that we all have to acknowledge is that this pandemic, you know, it is highly unusual, but has been a horrific thing this last year. And I think the NHS has been trying very hard to balance continuing to give essential treatments alongside actually trying to treat and manage huge numbers of very sick COVID patients. And actually that's been a very difficult thing to get that balance. And I say, I think I'll probably pass over to Nick in a moment, but just to say that throughout the whole thing, I know our hospital trusts have been trying their best to try and keep all of the cancer services going as far as they can within the limitations of the staff they've got and all of the measures that have had to be taken to try and make environments safe from COVID as well. But I can't hide away from the fact that sounds a very sorry and sad situation. So I can only say sorry and offer my condolences for that, and see whether Nick and Peter would like to make any comment.
Yeah, I'm very happy to come in there, and obviously my condolences, Joanna, to you and your family. It sounds horrendous. I think, though, a more general point there, whether it's our culture, we don't like to complain, do we? How many times have you been for a meal and they're saying, how was that? So, oh yes, it was lovely, and you're never ever going to eat there again. I was talking to a patient recently in outpatients, and I said, oh, how's it going? He said, oh, I've only waited about an hour. I'm thinking, well, if you waited an hour for a train or your Amazon delivery or whatever it might be, you wouldn't be, oh, I'll tell you an hour late. I think we set quite a low bar. I think patients set a low bar around expectation from the NHS. And I think we've got to collectively raise that. So, Joanna, in terms of your comment, you know, that needs to be looked at. We can't just say, and I'm very clear about this, and it's, again, I've spent my career making myself unpopular. I'm not going to use COVID as an excuse every time. It may be that there are very valid reasons why diagnoses are delayed and everything else, but I think there's a real risk that we and the NHS are going to use COVID as an excuse or a reason for not delivering optimum care. There will clearly be constraints. that have been brought about by the pandemic that are beyond our control. There's absolutely no doubt. We've kept all of our P2 activity, all of our urgent cancer surgery going, as Peter said earlier, with the help of the independent sector at Ipswich and Colchester. But I know that some other hospitals haven't for a variety of reasons. So I suppose my plea to you is don't just assume that's the way it has to be. Don't just accept that, oh, well, so we've been incredibly busy. Busy is the most damaging word in the NHS, in my opinion. Raise those concerns, have the conversation. I will always admit when we've got things wrong. Always, always, always. We will always apologise. We will always explain. We will always do that investigation. There are several things we can't change, and clearly the loss of a loved one is devastating. But I'm pleading with you, don't just accept it. Raise it with the people who run those services. Don't accept the excuse that we were just too busy because of COVID, because that may be true, but we can't just go on using that excuse. And that's really important. Don't accept mediocrity. We can do better, but we can only do better when we hear from you about where we've let you down. Thank you
so much for answering those questions. Joanna, thank you for submitting that question. And to be fair, I'm sure we all have different experiences of being in the system, and sometimes the system feeling like it's not quite on our side. So I know that from the answers that Linda and Nick gave, we can probably apply some of their direction to our own situation. So thank you so much. That was quite a difficult question, but you guys handled it fantastically. I'm really, really grateful for that. We've got another question here that says, how about cancer champions, ambassadors that represent the patient? I feel like, Marion, you probably have, you were nodding quite heavily there. So
yeah, I think Balwinder asked that question. It's a brilliant question, and something that we're really actively working on is how do we, as part of our strategy for being much more inclusive, how do we try to leave the ranks of where we are to be where people are? So we often hear comments like hard to reach groups. I think that's a dreadful term. No group is hard to reach. We, as the people sitting up here, can be quite hard to reach. You guys are fine. It's just that we're not where you are. And that's where I see a role for cancer ambassadors. I have a vision that just as you have, you'll all be aware, I would think, about the Alzheimer's friendly logos and situations where, you know, you can go into a cafe and they say they're Alzheimer's friendly. And I've tested that out, and I've taken a whole bunch of people from a care home and said, do you really mean this? And we've gone in and created quite chaos where we moved all the tables, all the chairs. They really meant it. And you knew that they understood. I want to see people who are cancer friendly in the community, that you can say, should I go for my scan? You can ask the lady at Tesco's lady, because she's got a badge on that says, you can ask me about cancer. And that we encourage this dialogue. So it isn't something that just happens to a group of people that you really don't want to know about. It's just in the community. The people are there to support you. You've had a diagnosis, you know where to go. Somebody will help you. It's not some difficult, complicated person to access. That we are there supporting our ambassadors who say, or our cancer champions who say, yeah, you can ask me. I may not have the answers, but I know quite a bit, and I'll put you in touch with the person who does have the answer. So Balwinder, that's a fantastic idea, and one that, as the Patient Advisory Board, we're going to actively work on next. Thank you.
thank you. And you know what, it brought back to my mind that I wanted to say, if anybody is feeling potentially vulnerable because of this conversation, we do have the quiet room, and you're more than welcome to also just turn your cameras off for a while. We want to make sure that you're as comfortable as you can be today. Okay, over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you. So the theme of this event is about being heard, and I suppose there's two questions here. One is, how do patients get heard? But then the second part of it is, what happens if you are being heard but no action has been taken? So when we were looking in the chat, there's a lot of people that have gone to their PALS liaison, they've gone to, done through the complaints procedure, but nothing's happened. What advice would you give those patients? Maybe if I could start with, I'll move around to all of you. So Peter, do you want to go first?
Well, not really, because I don't know that I've got an answer. I mean, I guess if you've gone down the established routes, your only option is to go back round them again. But I think it's true to say that certainly from my perspective, I'm not sure about the PALS system, but certainly a complaint to the chief executive of a trust does spur action. We have an obligation to reply to it within a certain time limit, and it goes around all the people involved in whatever event has occurred. I think what happens beyond that is often difficult to trace, and of course, perceptions will be different. And I think that's probably the biggest difficulty in establishing that. And I think it's a very difficult area because, of course, somebody who has been moved to make a complaint is already very aggrieved and feels they have a major concern. And I think, as always, these problems arise because of poor communication. And I think that's probably been the theme of the whole series of questions so far. That the fundamental thing is that we should be working as hard as we can not to let things get to that point. That for most people, a reasonable explanation is what they're looking for. And the reason they get to the point of having to go to PALS or make a formal complaint is simply that that's not been forthcoming. So I think the answer is that we need to work harder to avoid that event spiraling out of control. And a simple explanation, and maybe an explanation of why things can't immediately change in whatever direction seems reasonable, is what we need to do more of.
I'd like to pose, thank you. I'd like to pose some questions to Nick to add to that, if you'd like to.
So just a couple of thoughts on that. So I think the first thing is the number of times that I get a complaint letter, and I do get many, and I wish I had an awful lot more, which might sound a bit odd, but I think for every person that complains, there are probably 10 people that haven't had particularly good service, but don't think they want to make a fuss. I always ask the question, did you raise it at the time? And they said, oh, no, we didn't want to, because we didn't want to upset the nurse or the doctor or the manager or whoever it was, because we thought it might affect our care. And I think that's a real fear. So I think there's something about how open the people delivering the care are, and it's something I talk to the staff a lot about, is to just check in every now and again, how are things? So when I see somebody say, well, I was in pain for the whole weekend. So well, did you raise it? I mean, not in an aggressive way, but what did you say at the time? Well, I didn't really want to make a fuss. That person should have been asked every 3 or 4 hours whether or not they're in pain. So I think there's something about preventing, and I think Peter's comment about nipping a lot of these things in the bud. I think the second thing, I've just made, this thought has just come to me, and I shouldn't think Amanda's going to thank me for this or anybody else at the Alliance. So I'm just saying that as in advance. Amanda, I know she's somewhere on the call, she's hiding away, but I know she's there. And I just think it's something the Alliance will take back, and I'll talk to Nick Carver as the chair of the Alliance South, is whether or not there was a way of capturing all the issues that are raised about local care delivery across the cancer alliances, because what we will start to see is a series of themes. Now, Ray and Marion will have some idea of that, but only if they happen to be involved. And I just wonder if there's a way of capturing issues that are coming up around cancer care across both alliances to see, so we might find there's a real problem, as I'm sure there are many in the service that I have the privilege of leading, that might have been fixed somewhere else. So it's not about necessarily learning best practice, because we do a lot of that, but it's about understanding where the concerns are. So is there a way of the Alliance capturing some of those issues that are being raised regularly? And it's not about me then holding the different organizations to account. That's not my role, but it might be supporting them. Just a final comment, and it was really about the issue about ambassadors or whatever. I think there's been lots of talk about whether or not patients should be involved in that decision making at the multidisciplinary team meeting. I think practically that's really, really difficult. I just think so. However, if somebody asks the patient before the multidisciplinary meeting one simple question: what matters to you? Not what's the matter with you, but what matters to you, what's important in terms of your cancer care. And they take that information into the MDT meeting. That frames the meeting differently, doesn't it? Because the clinicians in the room trying to second guess what's important to the patient is really difficult. And then the feedback to the patient is,
this is what you said you wanted from the multidisciplinary team meeting. This is what we discovered in terms of your clinical condition, and this is what we can offer you. And I think that just changes it slightly. Thank you.
I just wanted to quickly pop up as well, just after Nick, because Nick, you said something really profound at the end about what matters to the patient. And one of the really key things, as I know that Lindsay and I are co-hosting the day, but also we're both patients. And also I wanted to bring highlight the fact that actually this event was brought about for exactly that reason, because we wanted to make sure we fully understand the barriers sometimes to being able to express ourselves, or to being able to, you know, get the support that we need in the moment at that time. And so there are other avenues to making sure that people are heard, and to educating people about the barriers that stop us from being able to bring our whole selves into a consultation or into our treatment or anything else like that. So that, you know, we all represent different arms here, but the whole purpose of today, and that's not me saying it from a patient advisory board perspective, actually, this is me saying it from a patient perspective and from somebody that also wants to see themselves represented. So I wanted to bring that in as well, so that we know that there are other ways that people are trying to make sure they're heard. Ray.
Just to say, I'm not talking about complaints now, but if people have experienced something which hasn't always gone well for them, both of the NICs who chair the two boards have said that they would like to have real life patient stories told to all members of the board at the start of each meeting. At the moment, because we're still fighting off the COVID, it probably won't happen before the April board meeting. But if patients feel that they have a story to tell which would benefit others through improving services and being more responsive to patients, then they should get in touch with us through the website, and we will ensure that their stories get taken forward to the relevant board.
I know you wanted to add something, Amanda, and we always want to hear from you, so please go ahead.
Of course, thank you very much. I am the Amanda to which Nick referred. I'm Amanda Plevin, and I work across the Cancer Alliances. I wanted to really echo what colleagues have said. The reason for this event is absolutely to listen, and what matters most to you matters most to us. And I do not say that in any light way. So the challenge from Nick in terms of, can we find a way to work with our hospitals, with our primary care colleagues, possibly even palliative and end of life, to really think about what matters most, and then importantly, what can we do? How can we support? We don't have all the answers. Our clinical colleagues, our operational colleagues don't, but very often you do. And I think one of the things we can do from this in a very practical way is to think about how better we listen in a way that we can use that listening to start to make a difference. And most of the services that are really good and exemplary across the NHS for cancer services in the east of England absolutely have that at the heart of them. So challenge happily accepted. Thank you very much. But if we could turn Nick's mic off shortly, that would be super. I'm joking. Thank you.
Absolutely. We can permanently mute him. That's fine. No more actions coming about. I just wanted to say to everybody that's putting comments, not necessarily questions, in the chat, it is still very helpful, and they will be circulated to all the members of that board afterwards. So whilst we're not reading them out necessarily, please be assured that everybody on that panel will be seeing your compliments that you're saying, and also some of the questions. There was something mentioned quite a lot around Health Watch. Yes, there are local health watches, and they are very good for capturing some of those trends, and maybe that's another way that the Cancer Alliance can explore, obviously, how they work together. We have just a couple more minutes before we're going to go for lunch, and I really want to make sure that we do stop for lunch, because we're only having a very short 30 minutes. But I really want to assure you that please come back at 12:45, because we are going to be looking at communication, and we've got a really good session which is really looking at the art of communication and what can go wrong and what can go right. So definitely come back for a nice energetic session. I just wanted to share with you 3 kind of major sort of, I suppose, thoughts or key themes that I kind of have taken from this morning session. One was around time and the importance of time, that came from Nick's speech. With regards to Professor Thomas, it was around lifestyle, and that has just ruined my lunch, so that's great. And then also the importance of listening, communication, and making sure that when you're talking, it's about what matters to you, and ensuring not what happens to you, but what matters to you. Shay, do you think I've missed anything that I probably should have mentioned?
No, just that everybody seems to have taken a bunch of notes, and they have a lot to say, which is fantastic, because, you know, it's always the case that you can have an event like this and people just listen, but this is a listening event. And I promise you that in every single meeting before this event happened, that position was pushed forward by every single person on the panel. So no, I think you've caught everything. Thank you.
Wonderful. So turn your mics off, go and have a 30 minutes of lunch, and let's get ready to get back at 12:45 for the rest of the afternoon. I'm going to close the poll in a minute, but if you don't get a chance to answer, please, obviously we want to hear your views, so stick them in the chat. So I can, if I end it there, just to show you, basically, as probably expected, 69% of you are saying face-to-face is the best way that you can be listened to. If you've got any other ideas with regards to communication, then please, like I say, put them in the chat and we will collate them. So I want to welcome, first of all, everybody back. I hope you had a nice lunch. I know it was a short lunch, but I hope you had a nice lunch. So at the moment, we're moving on to this theme of communication, and we know, obviously, that communication between healthcare professionals and patients can be sometimes incredibly difficult and complicated. So we're really lucky to have with us Cyrus and Anthony, who are going to demonstrate how to make the discussion smooth and helpful. They are extremely experienced in this area and are giving us their time today to share some of their ideas with them. So without further ado, Cyrus and Anthony, over to you.
Brilliant, Lindsay. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Smooth and helpful. There is nothing more I'd rather be described as. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all having a really enjoyable and invigorating day, and you've all had nice lunches. And it's really nice to bounce off the idea of listening, because that's something we're going to think about when we're working for the next 30 minutes. So my name is Cyrus Lowe. I'm an actor, facilitator, and business role player. And I realized that I've just said the dreaded word actor, because as soon as you hear someone say the word actor, you think of role play and you embarrassing yourself on Zoom. So the first thing I want to do is say no one is going to have to embarrass themselves by taking part in any role play today. All you're going to have to do is sit back and just give us your thoughts on what you see. And for me, put your hands up if you've ever had to do role play at work. That can be a real hand or a virtual hand. Okay, lots of hands up. Put your hand down. Put your hand up again if you hated it. Yeah, so we've got a nice majority there. Now, for me, role play gets a really bad rep, because actually what role play is, it is a chance for you to practice conversations and communication skills. And in some instances, you can practice conversations that you need to have. And I think that's always a really powerful tool in real life. I think it's always helpful. I think it's even more crucial when it comes to cancer care. Because, you know, if you're going to have a conversation with someone, a clinician, where the stakes are so high for you, you want to try and be in control of your communication and come across in the best way possible to get the information that you need. So I think the opportunity to practice these conversations can be really helpful and really powerful. And I think what we're going to share with you today, some really key skills and tools I think will be worthwhile for you moving forward. And with regards to practice, you know, we can all read things in books, we can all watch things online on YouTube, but I think nothing beats being in the hot seat. Nothing beats you remembering how you felt during practicing that conversation and that communication. It's experiential learning by experiencing. And the great thing is, you never have to do any acting. You leave all the acting to the actors, and you would just be yourself practicing having that conversation. And then you get the benefit of getting in the moment feedback from the actor. That's something we very rarely get in life. We spend our whole lives communicating in the way we've just kind of learned by osmosis, and we very rarely get feedback in terms of what we can flex in that sense. Why actors? Why are actors experts at being able to look at communication skills with you? Actors spend their lives trying to remain calm in incredibly stressful situations. First nights, auditions, 8th recall for Les Miserables and you still don't get the job. Yes, I've been there. But actors have that ability, you know, to remain calm on top and be paddling away on the bottom like a swan does. So we'll be looking at that today. So we are going to show you some edge of your seat drama from the safety of your living room. Forget Line of Duty, forget Dr. Foster. This is where the drama is going to happen. And what I want you to do is I want you to watch the drama. I want you to enjoy the drama, but I want you to watch it forensically. I want you to look at the things that the person I'm about to introduce you to does. Look at what's working for him. Look at what isn't working. What is he doing well? What could he do differently? And just log those things in your head, or you can jot it down, whatever works for you. And then we'll be picking up on that afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to invite you to my colleague today, Anthony. So for the purposes of our session today, I am the actor, Cyrus. I'll keep that name because it's easy. And Anthony is the real life person who wants to practice a conversation that he needs to have. So I will hand over to Anthony now, and Anthony will tell you a little bit about his situation.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to practice a conversation that I'm going to have with a cancer consultant. The reason for this is that around Christmas, I noticed a mole changing on my shoulder. It kind of looked different, felt rough and stuff like that. And I was a bit concerned about it, but I thought, well, I don't want to be a burden, you know, at this time of the year with COVID and stuff. So I thought I'll just keep an eye on it. And then it got to a point last week when I thought, I've got to get this checked out. So I booked an appointment with the GP, and they took a look at it and then referred me to Addenbrooke's. And the referrals come through. It's for in a few days' time. But the closer I'm getting to the date, the more worried I'm getting, because I'm just thinking about, if it's bad news, what it's going to be like for my kids, my wife. And I haven't told my wife because I don't want to scare her. So what I want to be in the conversation with the consultant is I want to stay strong and I want to control my emotions. I don't want to get overwhelmed. I don't want to get emotional and lose it. So I can see the actors connecting now. So here goes. Wish me luck.
Hi, Anthony. I'm Cyrus. I'm going to be playing the consultant today. We had a chat, so I know what the conversation is about and what you want to achieve during the conversation. It's a safe space. It's a chance to practice. So please don't worry in that sense. So what I'll do, Anthony, is I will just call me Cyrus or Dr. Lowe. Call me Dr. Lowe. I've never been a doctor before. Call me Dr. Lowe. And we'll just pick up the conversation from the moment where I've done the examination, and we'll just run for a few minutes and then we can talk about it. Okay. Hi, Anthony. So I've completed the examination on the patch of skin that you presented today. I just want to let you know that it is a patch of skin. It's not melanoma, which means it's not cancer.
Oh my God. No. Oh my God, thank you. That is such a relief. Bloody hell. Oh God. I've been worrying about this since Christmas, and yeah, thank you.
No, that's fine. And it's, you know, it's a rough bit of skin. It's quite common, dare I say, for someone in your age bracket to have that kind of skin tag. So I can let you know that today. With that in mind, I did notice a lesion next door to that patch of.
You just said there's nothing wrong. You just said it's like there's nothing. It's just rough skin. And now you're saying there's something. There is something wrong.
Okay, so we're talking about two different things. So we had the first thing that I looked at, and now I'm talking about a second thing that I noticed next door to it. And what I'd like us to do is just keep an eye on that. Have you noticed it before?
Well, sorry, notice what? I mean, what? I don't know. I don't understand. I mean, you've just said, you've just told me that there's nothing wrong, and now you're saying that there is something wrong with me.
So just, and I know this is a lot of information, but just to be clear, we're talking about two different things. So I examined the first patch of skin, which is absolutely fine, but I have noticed this lesion next door to it.
Right.
I just,
you know, sorry.
So I just want us just to keep an eye on this lesion, and then we can look at a follow-up appointment, and we can see if it has changed over time.
Well, so like, you know, a week or two, something like that, like a follow-up in a week or two, something like that.
Okay, so in terms of the follow-up, obviously we'll need to see how it changes over time, any incremental changes. So it'll be a 3-month.
3 months. You mean I'm going to have to go through this again for 3 months?
Just so in terms of looking at changes, we need to give it that time scale so we can really see.
I don't understand. I mean, why can't I just look at it now?
Because I only noticed it today, so I'm not going to be able to notice any changes if I look at it now.
Right. So I'm going to have to go through all this again, everything that I've been through since Christmas.
Okay, Anthony, let's time out there. Let's have a pause there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, we're just going to talk about what happened. How are you feeling?
Yeah, yeah. Everything came out. Everything that I've been thinking about, worrying about since Christmas has all come out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say is I want to do the feedback in quite a structured way. So I'm going to come to you first because you were in the hot seat. So in that practice that we just did, what did you do well?
Nothing. Didn't do anything well. It was rubbish. Sorry.
Okay, well, it definitely wasn't rubbish. I was on the receiving end of the communication, so I'm not going to describe it as rubbish. There were definitely some things in there that you did well. So what I want you to do is just sit for 30 seconds. There's no rush. Just have a think and just let me know, looking back, what did you do well in that practice that we just did?
I suppose I was confident, I suppose. I think I kept eye contact. That was hard. That was hard. Yeah, I didn't cry.
No, that's true. That's true. Was that something you were concerned about?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing. See, told you when you think about it, you can think of some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to act like that. It's just that when I heard that word lesion, it just scared the hell out of me because my cousin Cherry in Australia had a massive lump taken out the back of his neck, and it was touch and go. It was really scary. Okay. And they call that. He said it was a lesion. So that's the first thing I thought of.
Okay, well that makes sense.
When he said that.
No, that makes sense, and you know, I'm an actor pretending to be a doctor, so maybe that wasn't the best choice of words to use, but I saw that word have that impact on you. Okay, so thinking about, because we're going to go in and we'll practice again, what could you do differently in that conversation? What could you have done differently?
I suppose I could be more confident, I suppose. I could try better to kind of understand what the doctor was trying to tell me.
What makes you think you weren't understanding?
Just that I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't really know what, I think because I was like, there were so many thoughts in my head, I couldn't really follow what he was saying.
Okay, so there was a lot of thoughts going on in your head. So you weren't, so you were in a battle really. You kind of had your own thoughts going on, and you were trying to listen to what I was saying. So how well do you think you were listening during the conversation?
Not very well, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What else could you do differently?
I don't know. I mean, it feels a bit weird to be honest, because I'm not an actor. So.
Well, you're not acting. You're just practicing the conversation. So, but yeah. No, it is weird. I mean, it is weird. We've got 100 people watching us. It's definitely weird.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else I could do differently.
Okay, okay. Well, listen, from my perspective, well done for diving in. And what's good is we've got an hour together, so we can just keep going in, practicing and refining. I completely agree with the stuff that you thought you did well. I thought you were very confident. You know, you very much were kind of well, you didn't hold back in that sense. You had really good eye contact, which I know can be challenging. And you didn't let, I know you kept on top of your emotions. It would have been absolutely fine if you would have cried, from my perspective. But if that was something you were trying to manage, you managed that well. And I definitely felt there was a battle with the listening skills, because often when I was trying to explain things or elaborate or give you more information, you were cutting me off when I was speaking and kind of going on your own tangent effectively. And there's a couple of times that I just thought you misheard what I'd said, which then took you to a different emotional place. So for me, what the conversation needed was space. It needed you to give yourself the thinking time to form your question, ask the question, let me give you the answer, let you digest the answer, and then go on to your next question. And I think a link to that is your pace of speech was quite fast, probably faster than your brain could keep up with. So I think for me, it's just slowing down the brain, just giving yourself that thinking time. If you slow down the brain, that will also give you the time to actively listen and fully pull and digest all the stuff that I'm saying. I think as well, if we go back in and slow down that pace and work on that active listening, I think if you truly listen to what I'm saying and how I'm positioning it to you, that will take the heat out of the conversation. Because and you can tell me if you think I'm wrong, but from my perspective, that kind of emotional place you were going to was because you were slightly mishearing what I was saying. How does that, any feedback on the feedback?
Yeah, so really just slow down.
Yeah, basically. So listen, we're going to dive back in, and what I want, and then I've thrown a lot at you, so we can't do everything at once. I just want us to focus on a couple of things. I'm going to ask you to do something that's going to sound absolutely ridiculous, but I just want you to see what it feels like. I want you to speak at half the pace.
Right.
And just see what that feels like. Just literally just try and speak at half the pace. And I want you to every time I finish speaking, just give yourselves 5 seconds thinking time before you come in with the next thing. So speak at half the pace, give yourself that 5-second thinking time, and keep working on that eye contact as well, because I think that's something that's really, really working for you. How does that sound?
That sounds all right, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we're going to pause there. So what would happen in terms of our practice is we would just keep refining our conversation. But what I want to do is, I did ask you to, and I think some people have done it already. So just throw some stuff in the chat bar. What did you see? Is there anything that me and Anthony just fed back on that you have in addition to? Because you were observing. We were kind of in the middle of doing it. So it'd be really interesting what you're saying. Now, really interesting. Elaine's okay. Well, I'm just trying to. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through. These guys are great. Sarah said at 12:48. I wonder if Sarah still feels like that. Now, this is interesting. We've got a comment here from Elena. I think, Cyrus, you could have shown a bit more sympathy. And that's absolutely fine for you to think that. But unfortunately, you are not in control of the person you're having the conversation with. I think you can give that feedback to the person, but I think obviously, what we're in control of is our own communication style. But you're absolutely right. If you genuinely think that someone isn't showing you sympathy, you can just say, look, this is what's happened and this is how it's making me feel. This is what I'd like us to do moving forward. And they can't argue with your feelings. That viewpoint is absolutely fine. Impressed at Anthony questioning Dr. Lowe. I never questioned doctors. I always felt that not being as knowledgeable as doctors. I often look down upon, yeah, that's a challenge, you know, having, and that's where he was confident, don't use lesions when you mean lumps, so using that jargon. Let's just see the feedback. Really helpful suggestion, slowing down. Don't forget the shock people feel at bad news. Have someone with you. Yeah, Anthony's having this conversation on his own. He said he hadn't told his wife for the reasons he said. Maybe that's something he can look at. Don't argue with your feelings. Yeah. Anthony said he had a concern about crying. And I said to him, if you needed to cry, you could have cried, you know. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. In terms of tips, yeah, all my appointments were alone, so I brought some with them. So, did you have, you know, did you achieve a gold star? Did you have, you know, the feedback that I gave, the feedback that Anthony gave himself, and some additional feedback points from yourself as well? You probably had more. Practice is useful, but what you'll probably find is you have the answers. You know this stuff. But when we put ourselves in emotional situations, a lot of our kind of natural instincts in terms of communication can go out the window. Obviously, a lot of these conversations are happening online at the moment, which adds its own complexities. So I think for me, it's just giving yourselves 5 minutes before you go in to have that conversation online or in person, just to get yourself in that headspace and just to calm those nerves. And I would say one of the 2 key bits of feedback I gave Anthony was slow your brain down. Life's busy, work's busy, 2021's busy. We all are constantly in fast brain, and actually being able to communicate effectively requires you to do the opposite and be in slow brain. Summarizing. If you find yourself in a situation with a doctor and they're spouting lots of stuff that you don't fully understand, just say, doctor, before we move on, can I just summarize what you've just said so we're all completely on the same page? And slowing that brain down will allow you to actively listen. So you are absorbing all that information. And if you're absorbing all that information, you then have the ability to fully read the verbal clues and the non-verbal clues that are coming your way. That was a whistle-stop tour through communication skills, but I just wanted to share that with you before you continue the afternoon's work. Now listen, I'm now going to let Anthony, and listen, keep doing this because the chat bar is there for you all day. So keep sharing your thoughts and opinions because you can continue this conversation when we go. I'm going to release Anthony from being Anthony the patient. Anthony is my business partner, and we work on this communication stuff with various organizations all across the country. Anthony, some final words before we go.
Well, first of all, to everyone, thank you for watching and thank you for your comments as well. I'd just like to say that the real benefit of this type of approach is that it prepares us for what can go wrong in conversations. Because in real life, we only get one shot at these types of conversations. Whereas in these situations, we can have a go, we can have a disaster like it felt to me in my conversation just then, but we can pick ourselves up and have another go and be coached in how to progress. So that's the real benefit of this type of approach. With that, I'd like to say thank you to the organisers for today's event, the East of England Cancer Alliances, and I wish you all well.
Yeah, brilliant. And I jump on that. Thank you for having us today. Thank you to the organisers. I hope it's been a useful day, and hopefully I'll see you at some point in the future. And I think I'm handing back to Shay or Lindsay now. I'm not sure who.
Yeah, you're absolutely handing back to me. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic. I'm actually trying to spotlight myself, but I'm sure I'll pop up in a second.
Slow your brain down, and you'll be able to
slow my brain down. Absolutely. You know what? Great advice. That's all I can say. No, honestly, thank you so much, Cyrus and Anthony. That was definitely interesting, and there's no way any of us are feeling heavy after lunch. I know that I'm not, and I was fearful that I may do. So guys, please remember, if you have any questions and comments as you engage with the program, feel free, as Cyrus just said, feel free to send them to the admin in the chat box. You guys are, well, not you guys, everybody here has been communicating and engaging so well throughout today. And it's really amazing to see and read your comments. because we all experience these feelings. So it's really nice to communicate with you. We are monitoring all communications and they may be read out, so please have your say. Also, I want to remind you all that we are recording today's sessions, so you will be able to get copies of this recording at a later date. And then also, if anything that is happening on the stage here is making you feel you know, closer to your vulnerability or whatever is happening, please know that you're welcome to turn your camera off and step away. We also have a quiet room, so if you want to go into the quiet room, one of our team will meet you in there. And you know, we just want to do as much as we can to support you throughout today. Okay, so we've had an engaging day so far, and we're going to keep the same energy for the rest of the afternoon. So I'd like to encourage you to get comfortable as I introduce Dr. Daksha Trivedi. All of us have our own experiences of cancer, obviously, and it wouldn't be right for us to hold a patient event without asking a patient to share their journey with us. So, Daksha was born and raised in Kenya. She migrated to England with her family in the 1970s. She grew up in Coventry before pursuing her higher education in Liverpool, London, and Cambridge. She now lives in Meppershall in central Bedfordshire. She had hardly come to terms with the painful loss of her twin brother from advanced cancer only 6 months earlier when she herself was diagnosed with cancer. She has a deeply moving story, but I think she can tell her story much better than I ever could. So will you all just unmute for me to welcome Daksha Trivedi to the stage?
Thank you very much, Shay, and thank you to the Cancer Alliance East of England for inviting me here today. I'd really like to thank the earlier speakers, both Nick Hume, whose story I aligned with, and then Professor Roberts, which reminded me how I use some of my own professional background. And of course, the actors, Cyrus and Anthony, you made me think whether there's some way I could have handled my diagnosis in a different way. So thank you very much. So the key motivation in sharing my story was to share the hardships and the challenges that I had to undergo and overcome with my family as a way to encourage patients and families, but also to make health professionals more aware of the needs of not just the patients, but their families, and the needed resilience needed overall with all the teams and the patients to undergo this journey. So it is a dream of every cancer patient to celebrate life and share it with those we love. Every cancer patient has this question. Every cancer patient has this question: how did I get here? And behind this question is a lot of fear, anxiety, worries, doubts, and it continuously plagues the patient as it did me and my family. The shock of receiving my diagnosis in the cold light of day on the 28th of December 2017, just after Christmas and just before New Year, paralyzed me, and I felt alone, really alone, not knowing what to do. So doctors deliver the diagnosis, and then what happens? So as Shay said, not only did I have to deal with my own diagnosis, but it was only 6 months after my twin brother died of a similar cancer, which had advanced to his stomach. And I just could not burden a heartbroken, grieving, elderly mother, 87-year-old lady who'd lost not just a husband, but 2 boys, and I was her only surviving daughter. As we came out of the consultation, her eyes were filled with fear, fear of the unknown. What I want to convey is, as we came out of the consultation, I could see that fear and distress in my mother's eyes, but within minutes, I was carrying a burden of not being able to talk to anybody about cancer, not being able to talk to my mother because I did not want to give her a second blow of a cancer from suffering from with a family. But I also want to touch today, later on how I've got here today since my diagnosis and treatment. This is my twin brother, whom I said goodbye 6 months before I was diagnosed. I had cancer of the lower esophagus, and so did he. And his had advanced to his stomach, and he was in Canada. And whilst I saw him through his 10 months journey virtually, I did spend a few weeks in Canada. So I cannot really compare the level of care, the listening, everything else that he might have done in Canada, but I can certainly say that there are commonalities in a cancer patient journey, whatever type of cancer you have. So when I was given my diagnosis, and I will come on to that a bit later on as well, the first thing that went into my mind was, would I have the same fate as my brother? Has it spread? How long have I got? Who do I talk to? What will be my treatment? And this is really important because my diagnosis that was given to me was very clinical. By the way, it was completely out of the blue because none of us were expecting a cancer diagnosis. So I was expecting some kind of inflammation in my bowels. But when the consultant said to me that your colonoscopy, your bowels are fine, but you've got cancer. And I went, what? And she said, you've got cancer of the lower esophagus. And that was pretty much it. And I remember conveying, I was in shock. I was paralyzed. Did lightning strike twice? I felt I was at the bottom of the barrel. And then I remember a friend said, good job, the barrel has a bottom. So when I was told this, I asked two questions. First question that came out of me was, what did I do wrong? And I recall a speaker this morning who started by saying it's nobody's fault. But with all my medical epidemiology, my evidence-based practice, my looking at evidence of risk factors for chronic diseases, that is what came out of me. And my second question was, what do I tell an 87-year-old woman outside who's lost her son 6 months ago? And I was told that the multidisciplinary team would get in touch with me. And that's about it. That was the dialogue, a diagnosis. We were then taken to by a nurse who actually was very sympathetic, but there was very little conversation about how I was feeling. My husband was in tears. And my biggest burden was, what am I going to go out there and tell my mom when she's looking forward to her first new year after the death of her son? So we mentioned communications, and this is where I was with that. The nurse was sympathetic. She told me to do my 5-year plan. She also said the same thing, multidisciplinary team will get in touch with me. And she also said that she wasn't an esophageal nurse. She was a colorectal nurse. So, she gave some leaflets. We went out of the hospital overwhelmed, destroyed, alone, and pretending as if everything is okay for the new year because we could not convey it to my mother. We are given these statistics every day, and whilst they give the scale of the problem, and while it also shows us some positivity that we have increased our screening programs, we are diagnosing cancer so well. With every 4 minutes, someone in the UK dying from cancer. 1 in 2 people will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. This is from Cancer Research UK. We are still unable to talk about cancer. And for me, survival rates was a huge thing because survival rates do vary. But from my own professional background, I was aware that esophageal cancer was relatively uncommon, highly under-researched, and with some very, very poor survival rates. And the testimony of that was my twin brother in any case. So what started with me was a beginning of living with 3 months of uncertainty. I was diagnosed on the 28th of December. I had an invasive surgery. My food pipe was removed. My stomach's there. Stomach was stretched and my esophagus was removed. But that 3 months of uncertainty was terrible for all of us, because what was happening in those 3 months was that I was sent to numerous scans. And every time there was a scan result, a nurse would ring me the next morning just to give me my results. And every time I heard the word unclear, and every time I asked what happens now, I got the same: multidisciplinary team will come back to you. And it was not until a month after my diagnosis, when I had an endoscopic ultrasound, that I was told by the results that it's what you call poorly differentiated. That means it was aggressive. It meant it had the potential to spread. And 3 months, I really did not have a dialogue about how I was feeling, how I was taking all this in, and so on. So this slide is taken from my article in the British Medical Journal called Assuming the Worst. And this is where I could not talk about my cancer, because I just knew that my family, my extended family, will assume the worst because the twin brother died. So my fate is going to be the same. And I could not tell my 88, because I have to say my elderly mother has a very severe heart condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. In other words, she's in heart failure. And, you know, I took her through the grieving process, and now I could not talk about it. So what I would like to say, that you've heard something about my cancer diagnosis. And I would like to just consider, how could I had been better prepared? How could the professionals had been better prepared to receive and give the diagnosis? And the type of conversations that a patient can leave with. I do agree that I was frozen, I was paralyzed, time stood still. It was surreal. It was as if it was happening to somebody else. And how can we give information and support to somebody like my family, who's got a family history of a very similar diagnosis? Where do I go for guidance? I had very little idea, and I came back. My mother and I came back, and the only thing, when she asked me, "Are you all right?" I just said to her that there's going to be some more tests, and doing nothing is probably not going to be an option. She had tears in her eyes and could not come forward to ask me anything more, and I could not tell her anything more until I knew what my treatment plan was. So I really was looking for someone to give me some assurance, just that I would have the necessary help and support as I went along, and that most importantly, I would not be left in a place. I did speak. I didn't even want my employers to know what had happened. I had to tell them in the end. My extended family, when I was in hospital, I went for major esophagectomy. They knew something was happening, but nobody talked about it, because my mother also did not want to have a dialogue about the possible fateful outcome that she might have to face. I would like to continue after the next slide with a bit more about my onward journey, and the more about my treatment and the recovery and my experiences about that. So over to you, Jay.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jay Arab, and I work for the Cancer Alliance. And please don't worry, we're not stopping Daksha's really moving and poignant account so abruptly. What we wanted to do in the next 5 minutes or so is just take some questions, and Daksha's going to now expand on some of the things that she talked about in the first half of her talk. So we're going to take some questions from the audience, and give Daksha to expand on it, and then we're going to go back to the second part of her talk. So first of all, Daksha, welcome again, and thank you very much for sharing your account. Before we go into the questions, as a patient, can I just ask you, how are you enjoying the session so far?
I think it's amazing. I feel that I appreciate the openness of this event. I appreciate that it's a listening event, and I am grateful for the candid account by Nick this morning, and also the holistic approach to self-care, and that came through from Professor Thomas. But thank you for allowing me to be part of this listening event. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So Daksha, we're going to start with some questions and some comments that have come from the audience, and there's many comments that have come through acknowledging the courage and the emotional poignancy of your story. And many people have commented and asked in the chat about the cultural aspects to your story. And while you came from Kenya and you were born in Kenya, you have a very South Asian culture and ethnicity. How did that play in terms of the way that you communicated with your family, with your community, and with healthcare professionals as well?
It played a huge part in how I handled. You see, I think having lost a twin brother in my community, and also my mother's family being the only one that we've had the losses of, we were all overwhelmed. Well, I was overwhelmed with my husband, that I didn't want people to assume that I would have the same fate as my twin brother. And when we hear stories between our communities, a lot of it is hearsay evidence. A lot of it is not based on adequate knowledge. I don't think people in the community, my community, or maybe other communities, are aware of, although survival rates are low, and although you may have a family history, that every individual patient's journey is different. So people make assumptions based on what they are aware of, what they've heard. And I just did not want to receive any fateful or negativity from the community. It played a huge part. And that's why I titled my talk Assuming the Worst. And my mother knew something big was happening. And I said to her that we've got a close-knit family, we've got our extended family. And she did not want to be at the end of comments like, what went wrong, what could you have prevented? There is a judgment, there's a stigma, like, people sort of even talked after my twin brother died to say, was his lifestyle okay? He was quite, he didn't really look after his health very much. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm a vegetarian. And not just that, but then things that came to my mind was, they're going to think, well, I'm a diabetic. I was a diabetic. I was overweight. Hey, well, she did not look after herself. And then there is this karmic consequences of your journey. So a huge cultural impact on how we share what we're going through, or the reluctance to share. So with the health professionals, I actually described how it was as it was. I had very little conversation after that for 3 months, until a couple of weeks before my treatment plan was decided. And that time I had the most productive consultation, and I wish I had that sooner.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daksha. And another question coming in about the support that you received at the point of diagnosis. All cancer patients say that's the hardest time. Do you feel that you got the support that you needed? And is there any kind of thing that you hoped would have been different?
Oh, I definitely hope it would have been different. After watching the acting, I understand that at the time when you're given the news, neither the health professional nor the patient and the family may be in that place where they might be able to open up a dialogue. But I had very little opportunity for understanding what was going on, because of the scans being unclear every time I had a scan. What would have been quite nice, and what I would have appreciated, or would have helped me, was between the time of the diagnosis and the surgery, I would have liked to have access to some support. I didn't even know about the Esophageal Patient Association. My husband researched them out during my recovery. Didn't know, because again, it's under researched. I did try to find a support group near my area, and there was one support group, esophageal cancer support group, but it was held at the hospital. which I didn't want to go to, but also nobody came back to me. And then I found out later that it had closed. So really nothing in my area. You know, I had a couple of good school friends who were GPs, and I just talked to them. And I did the very thing culturally that people do. They'll talk to other people to see, should I go for an endoscopy? Should I do this? Should I do that? But not feel that they can have a dialogue with the person who's just given you your diagnosis. But in my case, I was told very clearly the multidisciplinary team will be in touch with you. So who do I talk to?
That's
So I was
wonderful.
waiting. So I was waiting.
And did they eventually get in touch with you?
Well, no, it was the nurse who, every time I had a scan, so I got a letter to say your CT scan is on this at this time. So every time I went for a scan, I would then get a call about the result of my scan from my CNS, who would say, I've got results of your scan. Oh, what is it? I'm afraid it's unclear. What does that mean? Well, we'll have to do a couple of other scans, and the multidisciplinary team will look at your scans and come back to you.
Well, that's really, really interesting, Duchess. Thank you for expanding on those points. I think if you carry on now with your next section, you're going to talk to us about some of the strategies that you employed to keep yourself positive, and we're really looking forward to hearing that.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Professor Thomas mentioned about the self-care plan and the self-management plan. And if you look back years ago, there was something called a patient expert program where you just need to get on and look after yourself. I was at a point which was why me when I left the diagnosis. And during the 3 months, it was what if? What if this happens? What if my twin brother could not do this? My twin brother could not. What if, you know, what stage is it? How advanced it is? It was only in the 4th week that I found out it was aggressive. So it had the potential to spread. So now it's coming up to 2 months and I'm walking around with untreated cancer. So I decided that what am I going to do with this experience that's happening to me? My emotions were all over the place. I was dealing with my cultural issues, but I decided to find out what did I need the most? What were my needs? What was really important to me throughout my life is the importance of being well. I'm not talking about cure, and I'm not talking about coming out of the other side, but what I'm talking about is that initially my decisions were based on fear, and slowly it became a transformative journey where my decisions were based on hope. Because to what now I needed to act, I also realized that worrying and stress and shock and fear are all cascading and are all real. And I needed to get in touch with the reality of the experience, but also make sure that I'm not just sitting in a rocking chair, which is not going anywhere with all these overwhelming emotions. So I needed to go from why me to what now. So I have put this up because it's a matter of balance. I had a 9 hour long surgical intervention, an esophagectomy, a total resection of my food pipe, 21 days in hospital. What I did know at the consultation just before my surgery was that there was no other option and they needed to remove my total food pipe. And once they went in there, they will just have to go with whatever they can see and handle it that way. Like I said, that was the most productive consultation, was taking me through the notion of an esophagectomy. I was otherwise, physically, I was overall well. What I did do is I knew that I had to get fit and well for surgery because doing nothing was not an option. And so before and after surgery, I tried to look after myself in the way that Professor Thomas really spoke about this morning: diet, physical activity. Coming from a professional background as an academic, as an evidence-based medicine, evidence-based practice, you know, I knew I wanted to focus on what I could control and let go of what I could not. I wanted to act on what I knew. So I started with what I knew. And I knew that fear, stress, emotions do have a negative impact on our health, let alone a cancer patient's journey. My older brother, who was 45, had a lot of stress and a lot of negative emotions. and he died of a sudden heart attack. My twin brother was very angry about his cancer. He had actually given up. He had signed up to his prognosis. In 10 months, he died. But he really was at a place where he didn't know how to make himself feel well at every stage. So I started to trust in the process. And during my recovery, everything changed because the way I eat and drink has changed, the way I sleep has changed. My whole life has changed. My family's life has changed. And it wasn't until about 4 months into my recovery that my mother began to work out what was going wrong. And I have to thank the Macmillan engagement officer who I phoned up, and she came to me because I was looking for a support group where I could access support. Some of my strategies were about balance and wellness at every level of my life. I wanted my emotions, my physical wellness, my spiritual wellness, my growth, my acceptance. If I felt the fear, I needed to accept where I was, to embrace my situation. So whilst I grew to accept my diagnosis, I did not accept my prognosis. Having said that, the only prognosis I got was without surgery. My prognosis was very poor, but I knew from evidence that a patient diagnosed with esophageal cancer, the survival rates are very poor. So, and I wanted to get back into my work that I loved so much, to bring that kind of balance at every level. I also needed to think about other strategies that would keep me focused in what was happening now, because I knew that this was going to be a long journey and a long road ahead. So I wanted to make my life better, like every cancer patient does. And given the evidence from Professor Thomas and what is known, that a positive mindset, I started to nourish my body with wholesome foods. I don't know, maybe all the things that Professor Thomas talked about, my physical activity, because I knew that physical activity has an impact on mental health, but all in our immune system, our biological processes. But I also started to nourish my mind and my inner strength. I started practicing mindfulness, which is really putting all my awareness in the present. My cancer diagnosis has happened, that's in the past. I really don't know how I'm going to do in the future. I don't know whether I'm going to come out of surgery, because I was told that the complications were high and I did get pneumonia. I really don't know what the outcome after surgery is going to be. So I began to have mindful goals, very small goals, and began to put all my awareness in the present. What it did do to me was it helped me to understand my thoughts and feelings, and to accept what I could, to focus what I could, and live each day in that moment, knowing that the next moment will be determined by how my mindset is today. Professor Thomas talked about holistic health, and I actually devised my self-care and my self-management program, which actually helped to empower myself, to self-empower, so that I took responsibility for the healthy part of me, the healthy lifestyle, for my own underlying health that I much needed. We heard this morning about the psychological impact can have an impact on our recurrence. But I tell you what got me onto my own strategies. We touched on the genetic element. So I did come across evidence, a twin study, which said that if one twin has got advanced cancer, then another twin has got a 35% risk of having that cancer if they're fraternal twins, or a 45% risk if you're an identical twin. Well, I was a fraternal twin. So so this is where I've come. If 35% risk, I've got the cancer, what about the rest of the 65%? Here you have two people born at the same time, in the same womb, different environment, different lifestyles as we go along. And there are other factors. So I knew that the genetic story isn't the complete story. And so my outcome needn't be like my brother's. So I based on that evidence as well, I embarked on this self-care, a holistic program, where I slowly transformed from fear to hope and drew that courage within. But the most important all is I began to look for a local support group because I really did want to talk about my cancer. To this day, about 8 months on, my mother did not know the reality. And then when the Macmillan engagement officer came to visit me, we talked about it with my mother, and she denied everything because that was her coping mechanism. She had to take me through a 12-month recovery program to get me back. And that's what we did. During my recovery, I did find a support group. Well, I could not find a support group, so that's something I did. I set up a local support group in the rural village that I live. And then onward on my journey in my recovery, I found the wonderful Asian Women's Cancer Group, very well established in London, and brings together people where you can share. I know Nikhil meant that, you know, we need to get it right with conversations with our multidisciplinary team and the professionals. But when we are not there, and maybe the communication needs to be sharpened both ways, there needs to be something where somebody can go. It's only when I started the support group that I began to talk so openly about it, even with my mother. And eventually, when my story became known, we were able to convey to our extended families. And so this has been the process of sharing the experiences at the support groups. And I know, Jay, we're going to talk about that later on. Diet and fitness, I knew that my lung was going to be collapsed. So I knew that I had to really do a lot of breathing exercises, a lot of breath, Tai Chi movement to get my lungs functioning. But that also helped with my own inner strength, my faith, my mindfulness, my meditation, and taking that moment of awareness into the present moment. So these are just experiences of the cancer support group. I want to be in the group and not pretend as if everything is normal. This doesn't mean I'm reliving my experiences. It means I can let go and accept my new life. And I think letting go of all those things I went through only happened because I decided to focus on what I could control and not go into the what ifs, what happens. Because although we talk about 3 months of my uncertainty, there is nothing certain in our lives. With or without cancer, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm struggling as a carer for my husband. This comes through in my life. 8 months onto my recovery, my husband became very ill because he had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, give my morphine. He had shingles, he became anemic. And one chapter in my book is about who cares for carers. They journey with us, but cancer impacts the whole family. And then by sharing experiences, I feel more confident about asking for help and support. Can I just say that when I shared with these cancer support groups, I was able not just to reach out to others, but also receive pointers about help and support that is available, for example, even on the Macmillan website, but which, because of the pathway we are in, it's very difficult to access, to know who can help without that regular dialogue. If I had the regular dialogue between diagnosis and treatment, maybe I would have sooner found some help and support. And everyone's journey is different, but there are many similarities, and we just learn how best to manage our journey. So I would like to thank not just the local cancer support group that I run, the esophageal cancer support group that I found, and now with virtual online groups, I thank them. And I'd like to thank the AWCG, the Asian Women's Cancer Group, who have been a tremendous source of support and help and sharing about everything. And I've just brought this slide to say, if I had this leaflet together with how to support your loved ones, together with the booklet called Understanding Esophageal Cancer sooner in my life, I think I might have managed my journey a lot better in the early phases. So really, yes to life. On the far right is my mother in the intensive care unit, putting all her hopes after a 9-hour surgery in intensive care. And every cancer patient's journey is to celebrate life, but it's not how long. I know my brother lost his life, and I'm very sorry to hear of cases today where due to delay in diagnosis from esophageal cancer, people lost their lives. But it's not how long you live, it's really how to live. And that's what I got from Professor Thomas's talk, is how to live each day as you're diagnosed. The biggest impact is on the psychological and emotional impact, and cancer support groups can go some way towards addressing the emotional impact. But having a dialogue right from the beginning, for example, when I was diagnosed, I was not aware. I don't think the holistic needs assessment tool was implemented anywhere, but that begins to give promise that it is to address patient conversations and concerns right from the beginning. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the second part of your talk. We're just going to spend a bit more time now exploring again some of those themes and taking some of the questions that came from the audience. So many comments, Daksha, from the audience saying that your talk really resonates and applauding your bravery for talking so eloquently about this. Many comments on that line. But I'd like to, if I can, just start with a question about something that you brought up in your presentation. It was about the period between diagnosis and treatment. It's the uncertain period, I think, as you called it. And it's where you had to deal with your uncertainties and fears about treatment. And you say at the same time you had your own path where you were going on a slightly spiritual journey. You were trying to discover yourself a bit more. And I was just wondering if you could just tell us how that journey helped you develop the coping strategies that you eventually came up with.
Yes, I needed to discover my own strength, because during that uncertain period, I had a lot of reflective time, thinking time, tears, and I knew really that I needed to be more than just cancer. I told myself that cancer does not define me, that hope and courage defines me. And I needed to discover that hope and courage deep down within the recesses of my heart. I knew that, I had been through the end of life care for my twin brother, and I knew what giving up means. I knew what anger means, and I knew I did not want to go there, because I didn't want any of that to empower me, but I needed to take a little bit of responsibility for discovering my inner strength. So definitely my mindfulness strategies, I used a lot of in terms of breathing, putting my awareness in every breath to center myself. I listened to my body more. I listened, I was not separate from my body. I was not separate from my mind. And I think I don't even using the word meditation and mindfulness. Mindfulness is where we are learning to understand our feelings and our thoughts, and then we act upon them. Meditation is objectively acknowledging all the emotions and thoughts we are getting, but we do not become controlled by them. And that had a huge transition really from making decisions based on fear of uncertainty and then making decisions based on hope. The hope came because of the reality of the evidence, that the statistics we see are based on population data. So whilst esophageal cancer has got very poor survival rates, here is my twin brother and here is me. I've had surgery, he hadn't. I don't know how long I've got, but I know how I can live in the moment. So it was a very slow, transformative, but a positive journey, again, based on what we know what happens to our bodies. The body has the potential to heal, and the mind needs to give it the space to do so. As Professor Thomas showed us evidence that negative emotions can impact on our bodies and our minds and our psychological impact. And given that knowledge base, I really acted on what I was aware of and what I could do. And actually, the support group opened up all possibilities of sharing and getting that help. So it is a holistic approach. And again, I come back to recently, I was at a webinar about a holistic needs assessment tool. And I am excited by it. I haven't heard much more than it being trialed out in breast cancer and bowel cancer. But again, that is the approach I took during that time of uncertainty.
Fantastic, thank you. And I just want to read a few more comments that are coming through. Wow, thank you, Dr. Trivedi. Your talk has really resonated with me. The benefits of how a positive mindset and practicing mindfulness can change the mind. So really kind of picking up on your theme of mindfulness. And another question about the fear here, and how those strategies help to overcome the fear that all cancer patients have. Is there anything more that you can say about that?
Well, what I can say is that fear is real. One example I can give you, to rise above the fear requires us to just self-empower ourselves. But one good example, visible example that came to me, I think you saw the picture of Badger, the dog, in my slides, the Malamute. And I'm coming from Kenya, I was bitten by a dog. So I had fear of dogs. And then one day when I was going for my PET scan, Badger's owner was walking Badger, and Badger came to me, and in a second, my fear just went away. And I thought, well, if my fear of dogs can go away just by embracing Badger, well, maybe I can embracing all the good things that are happening to me, and keep my fears away, or manage my fears in a way that I had less of the what ifs. What happens if I die tomorrow? What happens if I have the same as my twin brothers? The what ifs became less and less as I developed a positive mindset. And I think as you develop a positive mindset, fears do come. But there is a saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. I was afraid of dogs, but I embraced Badger, and my fear of dogs was removed. But no, fear is a real thing. But for me, I didn't want myself to be in a rocking chair, which just went back and forth and did not move and did not go forward. I did get afraid. Friends, if you're listening to this, every scan I went to, every follow-up I went to, okay, what's going to happen? Well, it can't be worse than an esophagectomy. My worst time was 12 months recovery, and the powerful effect the esophagectomy had on me. Well, it can't be worse than a very massive operation. And I think it's replacing the fears, the anxieties with something that can be hopeful, that can be real, that can happen.
Thank you, Daksha. And I just want to kind of move us towards some of the work that you're doing now. Fortunately, having had the all clear, you've started a support group. Yes. And there's some comments coming through about how after patients finish their treatment, sometimes they feel so alone and not supported. And I thought it might give you an opportunity to talk about some of the work that you've been doing in supporting patients in your Mid-Bedfordshire Cancer Support Group.
Right, yeah. And I think the comment about how you can feel alone during recovery is so real, because it was during my recovery, or shall I say, after discharge, I didn't know what was coming next, except that I was recovering, and that I felt alone, that I saw the impact it had on my family, that my husband was tired, that he was not looking well. And I knew that I would live in a rural area, people don't have anywhere to go. So that's where I called a Macmillan engagement officer, Rebecca Lone, who very kindly came to my house, and I asked her about support groups, and that's how we started one, a Macmillan assisted cancer support group. An amazing thing happened, that it's for any cancer, and it's also for carers. And when people came in, like a drop-in center, they were just wanting to share or listen. And many people go away with useful pointers. We have specialist speakers. And in terms of what my particular needs were, in terms of addressing some of the barriers because of cultural problems, I also wanted to know more about BAME groups, about Asian culture, and about how people can be helped because they don't access screening programs, they don't access services. And so I got a lot of useful pointers from the Asian Women's Cancer Group about that. But basically, the local cancer, the Mepishal Cancer Support Group, was good because it was about learning to talk about it. And do you know what? Just learning to talk about it is so therapeutic. Not only was I able to reach out to others, but I got a lot back. I came back, and I remember telling my mother, we need to talk about this. And she started to, she opened up. But you have to remember, with cultural issues, sometimes denying the diagnosis could be your best coping mechanism, which was my mother's. But yeah, and we're carrying on online now because of COVID. So we don't meet face to face, but we used to meet once every month. And if people wanted, many people wanted signposting. Many people wanted to know that they were not alone with the fears they had. And we got specialist speakers. We would get Macmillan GPs. We would get dietitians, mindfulness, just for people to know that taking responsibility for your health, but that you're not alone. That you know it's working together. And I've heard all the discussions today. And yes, I think we do
Actually,
need a conduit. We do need a conduit between the patient and the health professionals.
that's tremendous. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us, Daksha. A really, really powerful, personal story. Unfortunately, we've had so many comments, and we can't read them all out, but there's many, many comments in support of your story. I know you just wanted, before we conclude, I was going to hand back to you to see if you had any final reflections. And I know that there's a song that really means something to you that you would like to play on the exit to your section.
That's right. Thank you. So just to final reflection is that my transformative journey has remade me and helped me to understand what is truly important. And through accessing the right help and self-empowerment, we can make every day count and every day better. Talk about cancer. It's okay. After reading my story, my dear friend Veena Mistry wrote and sung a special song called Now Living the Dream. And I'd now like to share an inspirational clip from that. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
When you hear those 3 words, you have cancer, your whole world falls apart. You feel helpless, alone, and afraid. Everything begins to fall apart at the seams. Nothing makes sense anymore. Is there a silver lining I cannot see? Am I blinded to the hope? Do I have the courage to walk through this? I search for the answer inside. In the depths of my being, I see a light of hope, a light of courage and strength. I see the angels walking beside me now. I know I'll hear and I'll feel fine. I'm now living the dream, breathing hope into my being. I'll take a chance, a leap of faith, 'cause I know now that I'll heal.
Thank you so much, Daksha. That was like the most moving talk. I cannot tell you the amount of comments that people have shared with us, just saying how moved they were. So thank you so much. Wow, everybody, what a day we're having. Staying in touch. We hope that we can learn, adapt, evolve to become something that is really, really useful for people who experience cancer, whether it's clinicians, whether it's people who live in the communities. We want to make sure that our experiences are reflected and heard and, you know, really taken care of. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Lindsay to talk about our poll results.
Okay, thanks, Shay. This is just obviously with a few of you, just looking at our communication. We want to make sure that we can reach as many people as possible. So even from the poll, it does suggest that there is some improvements we can make to the pre-event communications. And if you have any ideas from now until when we close or even after that, please just put them in the chat. Any comment suggestions would be brilliant. Content of the day was rated between a 4 and a 5, which is in that excellent, but we are aware this is an event for patients. So anything you can give us with regards to shaping further events, further content would be greatly appreciated. And it's interesting to see that majority met your expectations. You know, it's hard to put on an event when you haven't had that feedback as to what you want. So I'm hoping that in future events we'll be able to get that to 100%. Would you attend another event? Yes, you would. And that's really lovely to know. Like Shay and I are saying, we're patients. You know, it's brilliant to get the fact that it was important to you. So that's fabulous. And then any other comments, bless, you've stuck into the chat. So we'll be collating those afterwards. So thank you very much. And I'll hand back to Shay to introduce the end.
To kind of bring up the rear of the day and to make sure that you guys understand that it's not just us as patients who have responsibility in this and can take forward storytelling. We also want to make sure that you hear from Amanda Plevin, who is the oh, I've forgotten her title. That's really bad of me. She'll introduce herself in a second. You did hear from her. You did hear from her this morning, but Amanda is in a really privileged position of power, and it's really important, I think, that she lets you know what she heard from all of us today as well. So Amanda, please, I welcome you to the stage to wrap us up today. Thank you.
Of course, thank you very much, and thank you both, Lindsay and Shay. You'll be pleased to know you're probably now only 5 minutes or so away from a cup of tea, which I'm sure will delight many of you. So just a few closing comments from myself. As we said at the very beginning, we have two main objectives for today. One was around listening, and I hope that you feel that we have done that. The second one is in recognition of how tremendous and incredibly diverse we are as a population. You know, cancer doesn't define, it doesn't determine by age, by gender, by background, or by colour, and neither do we. So it is important, if you are interested and if you feel you'd like to, Ray shared earlier, there are some links on our website. So if you feel you can and you wish to step in, then I would encourage you really strongly to do so. The three things that I wanted to share with you, the first of which is a reflection, and it's a theme that's come up across today, and it's about time, the most precious of all of our commodities. We can't buy it, we can't sell it, we can't roll it forward, we can't roll it backwards, which is probably a surprise to the number of face creams that I have in my fridge that my husband, I think, sometimes thinks is mayonnaise and eats. But suffice to say, it is something that we've all talked about today. Nick was talking earlier about cancer waiting times and targets of 2 weeks and 31 days and 62 and 104. And just as he said so very rightly, those shouldn't be the times that we try to hit. The question for us always in cancer services is how fast and how much better could we and should we do things for and with our patients. There are times when sometimes, and you heard from from Sirius and Tony, there's a time to go faster, but there are also times to go slower, to think and to give ourselves the space and time to reflect with our families, with our loved ones, and with children. And one of the breakout sessions was around talking to children about cancer. So time is a precious commodity, and I know that you know that well. So I can commit to you today, and as Shay was saying, I am in a privileged, I'm not sure power, but I'm in a privileged position as of today, as the Managing Director for the Cancer Alliances across the East of England. I can commit to you that whilst we have listened, that we will do more of it. We will listen to you. It is the most important thing that we can do and will continue to do. Your voices are important. So my commitment to you today is that we will continue to listen, and most importantly, in listening to your voices, it will shape the work that we do and how we move forward. And in terms of time, not next week, not tomorrow, not after our next board meeting, but from this moment forward, that's what we will do. And the final thing I wanted to say, which will be of no surprise, is a thank you genuinely to our brilliant presenters, Shay and Lindsay, but to all of our facilitators. We came together as a team, the presenters, the panel, the facilitators, and we hope that you found today informative and useful. You have certainly shared your thoughts, your views and your feelings in very authentic and open and honest ways. So my thank you is not just to the team that have come together to deliver this with you and for you, but also to all of you. And so the final thing that I'm going to ask of all of you is a round of applause to thank yourselves and each other for today and for the incredible day that we've had. And I hope, I know it will not be the last time. So I look forward to seeing you all again, I hope very soon. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.